Good afternoon and welcome colleagues to VHR Public Trust Board meeting. Great to see everyone. I often wondered when is the cut-off date? We've got to say Happy New Year. That's Friday. That's Friday. We've got consensus. Someone told me this morning. I've got until tomorrow.
Say till tomorrow.
Misleading.
We wished a happy new year at Bath board meeting yesterday, so you could follow that.
There you go. We'll follow with a collaborative partner. So Happy New Year and a fantastic break and a great start to the year. And I want to welcome Andrew Dina as our Chief Medical Officer to his substantive role. He's been coming here previously, and he's also a local resident. And were you born in this hospital? Or you can't imagine.
No, I was born in the old,
The old Kingsville.
but I no longer live.
And also welcome Dawn. Hi Dawn. Hi. If Dawn and Catherine want to, or Catherine, if you want to, Dawn and colleagues take seats where they're intended to sit, are welcome to that. Apologies received none, except for Mark is going to be joining us via Teams shortly. Catherine's going to introduce the patient story, which is about maternity services, and just say, Dawn, thank you very much for coming along, and really appreciate hearing your story today. Well, hearing what you have to say today, and obviously, you know, we'll have comments and questions and things to say, and then thank you also for coming back next month as well to have a further conversation in private board meetings as well. We've got, I assume you've been to boards before as well, so we've got time to go through this part of the board. This is a bit of the board that really adds value, sets the tone and context for the rest of the day for patient safety, experience, and ensuring that patients have a great journey with us are the reasons why we come together as a board. So whenever you're ready, feel free to start, but I'll ask Catherine to do some introductions.
Good afternoon. So this is a slightly unusual patient story. So you've got an active patient story, but Dawn's joined us as a new maternity and neonatal independence in the heard. And she's going to talk to us a bit about her role. It's a new role, but we're part of a national pilot. And it's really where parents can contact somebody outside of the hospital to talk to them about their experience and what anything they would like to raise that they feel perhaps hasn't been listened to or perhaps we haven't learned from. So today Dawn's going to come and give us a sort of broad overview of her role and of her key learning today. But as Mahbub said, we'll come back in February and we'll have a more detailed conversation. So over to you.
Thank you so much. I do also just want to introduce my colleague Raf, who works with me in Housewatch Redbridge. And Raf also speaks to maternity service users as part of Healthwatch Patient Champion role. And so she has some wider context to what I'll tell you about specifics. Are you well? Actually, to be rude. Thank you very much. Can I have one of my slides come up to measure thing?
Oh.
I think we're testing from
We've all got this slide.
We've got the slides.
Oh, yeah. Can you speak up the sides? Thank you so much. Maybe I will stand.
Yeah, and I have to double check that I've got some issues with the system.
Oh, you had some issues.
Dear George.
Okay.
We have all got this one.
Oh, you've got some.
Yeah.
Thanks. I would.
I think it would be.
Oh, that's really good. Thank you so very much. That is really kind. Sorry, I didn't write that. Thank you so much. So I'll just talk you through. I've given you some introductions to the role, which is a national pilot at the moment. And I wanted to tell you a bit about it so that the themes that I then present to you, you can understand where they've originated from, if that makes sense, and in what context. So this is part of an NHS England pilot programme across England. There's currently, in fact, there's 16 ICBs who were involved. And it's uniform across England with operational guidance and then locally embedded. And the role came out, it's a dual role, and it came out of the Ockenden Review, which was to respond to the call in the Ockenden Review to listen and to hear women in birth and families where there's been an adverse outcome. Because they particularly were responding to the theme in the Ockenden Review that families felt that they still were not listened to after an adverse outcome. And that then compounded the harm of the adverse outcome. And so this role is to situate with families where there's been an adverse outcome, to walk with them through all of the processes after that, and to then listen to the family, to be an advocate for the family, and then to be the voice of the family in the system. So this is then to enable the voice of the families in this criteria that I'll tell you about, which are quite specific criteria, so that trusts can hear and can respond, and that learning can be really matched to the experience of the family, as well as all the other investigations, but it's critically so that the voice of the family is there and can therefore be involved in system change. So it's a way of making sure that the citizens who've experienced an adverse outcome are involved in system change. So you can see there, it's the dual role, the green, it's there to support women and families in a new way, and then to respond to system change in order to strengthen processes, responses and cultures. And that's in line with national deliverable reports in time. And therefore, the role has its own escalation pathway, which is part of the reason I'm here today, in order that where families feel that they have exhausted other processes, I can have an independent escalation pathway through to all of the 3 trusts. So the role is across North East London, across all 3 trusts in North East London. And as part of the evaluation, I do feel I'll be feeding back that there does need to be additional people doing this role in order to care for the families across the trust. So when I speak to you today, it is from families in BHIT, but it also represents themes across North East London. So I want to be clear about that. And also in what I'm going to talk to you today, those themes are also represented through some of my ISA colleagues in the rest of the UK as well. So they are repeated nationally at the moment. And do you mind if I go down? Yeah, okay. I'll say, okay, that's very clear. I don't want to dial anyone or email anyone on your. I'm very nervous on this news. Thank you very much indeed. I'm moving on now to tell you. Thank you. Oh, that's great. I'm going to talk to you briefly, thank you, about the referral criteria. This has been set by NHS England, and the role has also been co-created with families from the Ockenden Review. It was specified to these criteria, which are quite narrow, and the reason for that was for the duration of the pilot. They will then evaluate the role at the end and evaluate whether they can widen the role to other situations of trauma. So we recognise that these are narrow criteria, which I will just read to you. And I always say at the beginning of the presentation, I do talk about families where they have experienced stillbirth and death, and I just want to alert people in the room just in case that is upsetting and difficult, because I know these are difficult. So the criteria is that this role sits with a person who's experienced a stillbirth after 24 weeks of pregnancy, which includes preterm delivery without labour, neonatal death, maternal death, unplanned or unexpected hysterectomy up to 6 weeks of this newborn, women in birth and delivery to critical or intensive care unexpectedly, and brain injury that's being diagnosed or suspected, including A grade toxic disability. Thank you. So if you look to the next slide, which has been co-created with all of my colleagues, my ISA colleagues, 16 of us across the UK, these are some of the processes that a family might go through in adverse outcome. Now, as you can see, there are many, many different processes on here. So there might be, for example, there might be a coroner involved, there might be a child death review panel, there might be an inquest, there might be an NHS resolution, there might be the National Safety Body, MNSI, the Early Notification Scheme, there might be the police, there might be CQC, there might be the GMC, and there might be local trust investigations. So family, for example, family I'm working with at the moment are involved with 5 different agencies, and those 5 different agencies all want to understand how the family, their experience. They want to hear from that family. That family has experienced a traumatic loss of their baby and unexpected things during the labor. And reporting into each of those 5 different agencies is very, very difficult and extenuating, and that's what this role can then sit with the executive, hear the family, draw up themes that reflect their experience, and then represent that to each of those 5 different agencies that the family does not want to account for. But that is the level of complexity of that family experience. So I'm going to give you now emerging themes. I'm going to give you emerging themes from work with families. As I've said, I'm coming to Trust Board in a month's time with 2 families who've asked me to explain their experience to you. And they've given me permission to tell you exactly who they are. I've gone through with them the themes that I'm going to present today, and these are also their themes. But when I read these themes to one of the families this morning, just to let them know what I was saying, that immediately made them extremely distressed to realise that other people do also experience this. So it's just to give you an indication that these are deeply held, very difficult issues to talk through. Now, I am presenting some negative experience today. And I need to tell you that that's because of this role. It is that challenge to tell you what the role was, because it's this dual role of advocacy and system change, particularly in adverse outcome and in the most serious of adverse outcomes. So by nature, what I tell you today is going to be where things need to be improved. I do also see excellent care support and communication with families in my work and hear about that as well. I'm not presenting that to you today. So I just want you to understand the context of what this is. And this is about where there's been an adverse outcome and then there's compounded harm if, for example, processes haven't supported the family. That is something that can be changed. That's what I want to tell you about today. Thank you. This is a summary slide. This is all I have to tell you, and I can answer questions on any of these points. I've got some illustrations. My illustrations are not taken from one family because this is anonymized. So this is I will give you examples, but they are not. I've kind of merged them so that they represent a theme rather than a specific family. And communication issues are very prevalent, and I'll take you through the points that you can see here. Probably the most common. I think the most dominant experience that I get told about and that runs throughout the care that people describe to me is that they feel that they were not listened to. So again, this is in families of adverse outcome, but this can also extend into the antenatal window before there was a no. So for example, with reduced fetal movement, some families are reporting that they come in and say that they have reduced fetal movement and feel that they're not listened to. And what I mean by that, and what the families mean by that, is that, for example, it's not just the sense of not being listened to, it's of reporting that. And then maybe a professional hearing that and then saying, you're a very anxious first time mum, that's not good for baby. Do try and calm down. But for a family who then experience stillbirth, because there wasn't, that then adds into a very complex and difficult. That also endures into a time after. So, for example, often in adverse outcome, there might be a description from the clinicians about the nature of the care they gave, where they might be saying, for example, the care that we gave was within guidance and it didn't contribute to the adverse outcome, we wouldn't have changed it. So for example, hearing that repeatedly from different clinicians, the impression that gives and her response, family response to that is, if my baby died, why would you tell me repeatedly that you wouldn't have done anything? It's that kind of nature of communication and bereavement and communication in those settings that can add to the sense of and related to that, written communication from the trust after an adverse outcome is a dominant theme, and that is also shared nationally among national colleagues. And that might be a letter, for example, that might be written back to a family answering a question or a complaint, where the person writing it clearly doesn't have a wider context. And an issue like that, for example, with a family where processes have gone on for 18 months, to then be invited to a birth reflections appointment at the end of 18 months when there has been complex processes ongoing for years, means that that person suddenly fears that the person writing that letter doesn't know about this. And I think reading really specifically into that there is a difference between the piece of a serious incident and then subsequent complaints. So, for example, if a serious incident is reported back to the family, this is what we're going to change, this is what we're going to do, and then the family don't feel that's appropriate, anything they subsequently say is raised as a complaint. That's then lodged separately. So the person responding to that complaint isn't aware of the other description of what's happened. I think there are some communication issues in that way. And particularly, I do also want to mention that written communication from trust, when there is a multi-site adverse outcome, when there's an adverse outcome where, for example, there has been a difficult birth where a baby is then transferred across North East London, differences in communication between trusts can cause violent harm to families. Because, for example, one trust might indicate that there has been a failure in care that the family did not know. And then they feel that the originating trust didn't explain to them what's the policy. And it can create a culture of suspicion. And so in multi-site adverse outcome, we do feel that we need, and this is a North East London, I feel that we need one person or a pathway across North East London to care for multi-sites. So that one person is communicating with the family, one person cares for their bereavement need, one, in the example where mortuary is needed, one mortuary. So there are different processes between bereavement policies, and the family can fall in between those. Just at the point where they are dead, so to switch from the ventilator. I'm so sorry, you might need your code. Oh, thank you, I thought. Thank you very much, everybody. So that is a comment about written communication from a trust, but also multi-site, and particularly multi-site where there is a difference in communication style as well between trusts. So some trusts might want to hear from everybody, whereas the other trust might not have the same engagement pathway. That leads to a family feeling grouped between two different styles, two different natures of communication, and two different levels of disclosure. And that can cause conflict. Other emerging themes, I'll just take you quickly through those. Am I okay for time? Okay, 4 months. Okay. Problems with timely escalation is a repeated theme I hear, where there is maternal figure or newborn deterioration, and that can relate with respect to feeling not listened to. So just tying up that experience, often a family feel that they can't make themselves heard when they're concerned about what is. Second point there, issues with bereavement care and ongoing support, especially if it's a breakdown in relationship. Trust that often, that is, in my families, that's often occurring in multi-sites, where there's two big. But for example, there are families who feel that the bereavement, where there are specialist bereavement professionals, they feel well supported, but when those professionals are not there, they feel that some of the tone of the language that is given, for example, why are you crying? You can have another baby. That kind of tone is not an appropriate tone for somebody who is sitting with them. And that in that circumstance, that is something I do feel like that could be changed with fairly immediately. Because that causes the family to feel as they leave that they have been in a system that didn't engage with the fact that they've lost a life rather than a pregnancy. And I think that's the sense that the families had as well in bereavement, that please could we, and so much of what I hear as well is, please could you respect the life that I lost rather than the pregnancy that had a complication. I do understand, families do understand pressure on clinicians, they do understand complex processes and that they might have had a complex high-risk pregnancy, but they had a baby. And that bereavement needs to match in language the loss that we experience. Governance procedures not meeting the needs of harmed families, in some cases compounding harm. I think I've told you about some of that already, but that can also involve debrief meetings where families feel that they are told that they shouldn't be feeling the way they're feeling. where a line by line defence of everything is given rather than a family who just wants somebody to say, I'm sorry you felt like that. Please help us to amend it. And some examples of the impact where care is not personalised to an individual's needs. I particularly wanted to raise, and I'll raise this in other areas as well, the care of families where English is not their first language, and families feeling that they are not able to hear what is happening, understand what is happening, and legally consent to what is happening as well, because they're not able to have an interpreting. And point of care interpreting during emergency procedures is still difficult across this trust and across all of North East London. And I do want to escalate that, really, particularly in terms of health inequality, in terms of known statistical adverse outcome that most likely is going to happen to families where English is not their first language, that we particularly put resources and emphasis on the point of care interpreting so that interpreters are available, so that a family can escalate when they don't feel that their baby is, when they feel something's wrong, or when they feel they're not being heard, and particularly in bereavement, where, for example, there a family feeling that they had to give birth to their baby who died without anybody who was able to meaningfully engage. So those are some of the things. So there's some of the issues. I'm coming back in February. I can take questions, but again, just to emphasise, these are difficult, complex, and extremely traumatic times for families. But also, I wanted to leave you with the fact that often, after an adverse outcome, consultants will also be emailing me to explain to me what they want to do differently, how they're going to make changes. They are also bereaved. And I do feel that I know my role is not for them, but I can't help but mention that to you because it's true. That where there has been a death, that there needs to be a palliative care pathway, there needs to be an understanding and a context where that is cared for and dealt with. And I just want to leave that because I think that would improve the care. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dawn. Clearly, from the way you presented that, this is an important subject for us. See, you're very committed. And speaking on behalf of the chair, the things that you said there, we made me think that having giving birth in our size should be the most wonderful experience in anyone's life, and that should be the starting off point. And anything less than that is something that we would not accept as a unitary board. So open up to any questions.
Thank you very much for your presentation. In my other life, I work at Children's Hospice, and they're part of North West London. They work very closely with Barnes and other hospitals because they've got some resourcing that the NHS is desperately short of. Translations, the translators, they've got the neonatal specialist midwives and things like that. And I didn't see that on the pathway here as something that could be leveraged. They'll provide care for 3 years after death as well, and full support for the family. So is that something that's being considered, the other sources of support for the families as part of that pathway, or could it be considered as part of the options?
I think everything. I think that families that I was speaking to experience, I think, would very much want change in the immediate intrapartum and antenatal care. And absolutely. And what I should have said is one of the things that families most want to communicate is that they want this to change for other families to come in. And I think some of the examples, the way that families are spoken to in terms of bereavement care in the unit, in that moment is when you can't. And so with respect, I feel absolutely that we need every signpost in, and co-opting signposted Sands to Bliss to charity, national charities who will work alongside. And for example, a brilliant organisation called Remember My Baby, who come in pain with the longest version of that baby. And that was absolutely extraordinary. So all of those processes, yes, please. I suppose my main commitment is to the moment of harm that is in the stories that I've given me, because that is my main, that's what I'm hearing. And I do very much want to signpost, and we've got a kind of padlock for this role that can go out of signposting to other ongoing, for example, there's a charity called it's an HIE, it's a hypoxic charity. And they work with families where there's been brain injury. So there is ongoing care pathways, and the bereavement teams are very good at doing that signposting onwards. But I suppose point of care harm can happen with the work in this process, and particularly not being heard. I feel that that is the point where many things go. So I suppose that's my escalation is to those point of care harms. But yes, I hear that, and I'd love to know more about that. Thank you. Thank you.
Ruth and Martin.
One of my reflections is, thank you very much for your presentation, and there's, when you said some of the sentences that are said, I mean, you can see how it was clumsily said and thought to be a good idea. It clearly was not. And I think one of the things I'd like the trust to do is, yes, we should have those bereavement midwives because they are invaluable. But actually, we need all of our midwives to be trained to a point. I mean, we can't have any of that bit of clumsy language. But I think the extension to that would be, when we talk about a pregnancy and a labour always being the most fantastic experience. Actually, the reality is, it's not for lots of women. And that's not to say it was something that went wrong. It's just that pregnancy and labour are really difficult. And I think that not feeling heard also extends to pregnancies and outcomes that were what we would consider to be positive. But actually, I get to hear in the community about lots of mums that do not feel that their labour was positive. And we know that that leads to a lot of postnatal depression as well. And so I think our training needs to be more about that communication piece, and bereavement is part of that communication piece. But actually, it's all about mum feeling heard and respected and acted on, rather than almost that instant flip back, well, you've got a baby now. When actually mum saying, that was the worst labour and not what I thought that this was going to be, this magical experience. And never mind then a mum that's then had a terrible outcome at the end. It must be so difficult. I think we've got a long way to go with some really good training to get this right. And not just our midwives, I think this is our doctors, I think this is our consultants, I think it's anyone, I think it's even your domestic staff, anyone that has got access to that patient is so important.
Yeah, I like to actually comment on that. You're so right about, obviously, where Dawn works with the severe outcomes. I work with mid-level, and the amount of women that come to us and they actually describe that although we actually have a baby in our arms, the point of getting there was extremely traumatic. And there's many subjects that they actually go through that, so they feel there was a lot of racism that was involved, the quality of care, the way that they were left in certain kind of bloody clothes. There's just so many traumatic things that have actually happened, and that's something that I report on. And there's a very big number of women that are actually in that whole situation. So I really do agree with you in terms of the training, understanding cultural sensitivities. There's just so many layers that need to kind of be indulged into. Pretty much with that. Really voicing my work that I do. Yeah.
We will be able to explore all of these issues in a lot more detail in the next meeting. Marta and Hilary, if you both make your comments, it would be a succinct response and pick all these issues up then later. Yeah.
Well, first, thank you very much for the presentation, like other colleagues, but I could see, the thought that really struck me, and I agree with the, in particular with the comments that Ruth has made in terms of, the clumsiness sometimes that, these harms sometimes
because people are just insensitive. There are lots of reasons, there are lots of excuses, not necessarily reasons as to why. And that's the bit we've been told about. But I'm just wondering, this is a pilot. So how do we as an organisation learn as we go along? Because it's clear from what you've said that you've already collected quite a lot of evidence that can be put back into our systems immediately to start to make the changes that we need to make. So I'd like to understand how YOMA, which is a national project and pilot project, is linking back into our organisation so we can start to benefit from it as early as possible.
Right, Hillary's, and then you can answer both.
Mine's more a point, so Ruth, thank you. Dawn. Yours.
It's a compliment.
Just to reassure you that one of the things we discussed at the Quality Assurance Committee, which I chair, was the translation and the interpretation. So I think, and we have flagged that as an issue in our maternity services because it is clearly a point of inequity. So perhaps we can pick that up in February, but it's just to say we're aware of it.
Thank you for that. I think, Raf, it's fair saying you also are aware of that issue.
Yeah, it's very prevalent in lots of translation services issues that come up with that.
Thank you. I think in answer to your question, how can these findings be fed back into the local trust? So the pilot, very briefly, the pilot's being evaluated at the moment by NHS England, by NIHR and RESET. They are the rapid response evaluation unit. In doing that, they're going to speak to the families that I've cared for and that have been cared for nationally. Also, some of the families who haven't used the service. And also, they're going to speak to key stakeholders and do an evaluation. Having said that, I met with Nina, who's our London regional chief midwife, and her sense is that she's asking NHS England permission for these findings to be presented at a pan-London clinicians education, sort of something that she will facilitate. NHS England, because it's a pilot, we're under certain restrictions because they don't want, for example, me to present in any national capacity because some areas of England don't have this service. And so they're concerned about the equity point during the pilot. And so therefore they don't want me to do sort of that kind of presentation. But Nina felt that it was, I think her word was unethical to not be able to use findings that we have immediately for immediate impact. So in answer to your question, that is resting with the London chief midwife, Nina, who is asking NHS England permission to use these findings for this area. So that is underway at the moment. I don't know the outcome yet because it depends on what NHS England answer. Having said that, I'm under no restrictions in terms of presenting to any forums that you asked me to present because I'm in your area. As in, I can't do anything national because I'm here. So if you asked me to present somewhere, I would do it because I would be allowed to do an immediate feedback, if that makes sense. But in terms of that bigger feedback, that's going, and they're deciding whether to roll out the role at the moment. So last week, I was presenting to there was the chief midwife and also the maternity director of the NHS, and they are deciding at the moment whether they're going to roll this role out as to whether it's a reasonable role, but that will be subject to the evaluations.
Thank you very much, Dawn, and look forward to hearing more from you next month.
Thank you.
Declarations of interest. Does any colleague have any interest for that? Vote on the electronic system. I know everyone's welcome. We're all familiar. What electronic system is he talking about? Minutes of the previous meeting held on the 7th of November. Are there any corrections to the minutes? If not, please, thank you. Does anyone have any matters arising from those minutes? Anyone? Thank you. Action tracker, there are 3 actions. The scheduling for board seminars to remain open. The schedule is in work for 25-26. The action relating to the safety of staff, sexual safety of staff, propose that we close that because we'll pick that up under PCC report back at this meeting. And on the Ulysses systems, scheduled to go to audit, I think on the 20th of February. So we'll leave that open until audit has dealt with that. Any questions from anyone? If not, okay. Move on to Chair's report and emerging issues. From Chair's report, I'll keep this really concise because we're running time. To just formally set out 2 new appointments. We've got Andrew Dana, who I mentioned earlier, as a substantive CMO, and Nick Kane joining at the end of, from April, as our CNO. And Catherine's last working day, she's left the room, so I can say it anyway, with the trust will be the 30th of April. Quite significant. Catherine's been the longest serving executive by far from there. And one of the things that I wanted to make happen was a campaign around investment in ED in Queens. Really pleased that Peter, Matthew and colleagues have started that campaign. And with that, hand over to Matthew.
Thank you, Chair. So there's couple of interesting points in my report. I think one was a bit of a look back on last year where we came out with special measures and some great information on some of the new services we've opened. The hub here, the Women's Health Hub in Ilford, the Aging Well Centre in Hornchurch, it's now up and running, plus the development of the CDCs at Barking Community Hospital in St George as well. Worth looking at that and understanding the positive impact that's had on some of our pathways. I want to call out specifically a thanks to the team at Queen's who've been providing 24/7 mechanical thrombectomy to a population of around 10 million over the last couple of months while the Royal London's had one of its major pieces of equipment upgraded. We've done around 50% more procedures than we were expecting to in that time period. I think we hit our 100th thrombectomy this week actually, and they've been working incredibly hard around the clock to keep that service running and have done a tremendous job actually. So a real thanks to all of the staff across multiple disciplines who've been involved here in getting, as the report says, a population of nearly 10 million people access to rural life-saving service. Been fantastic work. And we're looking forward to continuing to develop a joint service for North East London, Essex, Kent, and indeed all points east with Barts over the coming months as well, building on that success. The paper highlights finances, partly in the context of the electronic patient record rollout, which is really part of a digital transformation. It's interesting that the financial challenges in the years to come, which we're more minded about, plus the digital transformation, they're both kind of things you'd rather only be doing one of them at once, but we are doing both. So what we have is this massive digital transformation that we know will have an impact on productivity and delivery in the context of getting this essential digital work done. At the same time, we've also got a very, very challenging financial context. We've had 2 years in a row delivering £30 million of savings, which has been very good. But our expectation next year is that we're going to have to deliver a savings plan in excess of £50 million, which is taking us into the kind of territory that trusts really reach in terms of percentage of income as a savings thing. I think it will mean us probably facing deliberate decisions to constrain access to services, because this will have to come out of headcount costs. So we will be deciding how many people we can operate on, and we will be deciding how many beds we can keep in these kinds of conversations. It's the only way to get this kind of sum of money out. And as I say, doing that in the context of an EPR rollout, you'd ideally not try to do these two things together, but we'll give it a go. And this is going to be probably for me the two major issues for the board in the coming 12 to 18 months. How do we deliver the money and the digital transformation alongside all the usual businesses running the acute hospitals? I'd say the clinical groups have done a great job taking control of this as a challenge, and they've come up with some really good proposals to get us into a position where I think we're probably confident about a third year of £30 million of savings, but there's another £20 million to find, and that is going to involve some really hard decisions. If you look at this in terms of headcount, a £50 million programme is, what is it, like more than 700, Yeah, around 770 full-time equivalents. So anything we can save that isn't related to staff takes that number down, but we are looking at a really stark picture in terms of the steps that we can take with both within our trust, but across North East London, and to get the system balanced. The total deficit position for North East London is about the size of one of our smaller acute hospitals, basically. And so we're being asked as a system to effectively take the activity workforce of an entire acute hospital out of the system over the course of the next 12 months. That in a context where we've just had our busiest ever month in A&E. And at Queen's, we saw in December 31,000 patients through the doors of our hospitals. We saw around 3,400 ambulances last month compared to around 2,200 18 months earlier than that. So we're seeing really significant double-digit increases in attendances and volumes coming through. As the report says, the hospital was opened in 2006 for 325 people a day. This is Queen's in particular. In December, we got over 750 on one of the days there. We've seen at King George the real benefits you can get from investment in a new emergency department, in refurbishing your acute medical unit, in modern SDEC and CDU setup. Queen's is now so massively inadequate for the task which has been asked to deliver as an emergency department that we've this week started a campaign with the support of all of our local MPs to try to get the capital we need to rebuild in that front of the hospital. It's the single biggest risk to quality, safety, patient experience and staff experience in the organisation. We are, I don't like to use the word lucky in a healthcare context. We're lucky we haven't had anything worse happen there as a consequence of the conditions in which we're caring for people and the questions we're asking of staff in order to deliver care in there. And the fact that actually we've seen in the course of December and January up to 50 patients in corridors at points in time, I think is shameful and difficult. Actually, the staff are doing an amazing job in the circumstances, but the campaign I think has gone live this week with considerable interest across the media and actually some really positive responses from people within the NHS. And we'll be continuing to really push that, hoping for some new capital to come our way in the coming months. And I think probably the rest of the paper speaks for itself, really. Just to say that AD pressure should be seen in the context that we're the third best performing trust in London in the last set of published data and the 16th in the country out of 122. And then we're continuing to do well in those pressures. And we will be helped by the fact that the regional service at Queen's has moved out to St George's Hub. And Peter are appearing through the windows yesterday as it was getting painted up and ready for us to start using that to help us with the A&E pressures. So we look forward to updating the board next and what we'll do with that. To say thanks to some of our local GPs, including Dr. Ruth Crowley, for helping us out in our A&E for the last couple of weeks with more shifts to come. I didn't name you, Ruth, but I did quote one of your comments on Sky this morning, where it was interesting to hear this, that Ruth in her practice will carry out full consultation in 15 minutes. She said working in Queen's, it takes around 40 to 45 minutes per patient because of the physical layout of the department. You know, the environment in which we're delivering care is not just poor, it's unproductive and it's expensive and burdensome because of that. But what we're really doing with the GPs is kind of live QI, and we really try to improve the way we deliver the service and also work with our partners in the community. I think they're all the key points I want to shout out. Just a big well done to the cancer team. We've really pulled our cancer delivery forward over the course of the last 12 to 18 months. Our waiting lists are continuing to improve as well. We're already meeting the national goal of 65%. In 18 weeks, we'll find that other 5% next year, despite the financial challenges, I'm confident. Well done to the ophthalmologist department. They've done some fantastic work in cataract surgeries recently. And then, as the chair has already said, welcome to Andrew and look forward to our new chief nurse joining us.
Brilliant, thank you. There's a lot in that report, a lot happening at the moment. Questions, comments, compliments? You, there you go, Matthew. Just to emphasise 3 things from that. Digital money, operational performance, our biggest risks in this year. Absolute focus on that committee and giving assurance to the board around those. You're right in underlining that there's no organisation going through a £50 million financial challenge at the same time. Complete transformation around digital as well. I've chaired the board That's jointly with Vance, Sue, another colleague from there, Matthew, David presented. And it's clear that whilst we're on top of the risks, there are still lots of work and challenges ahead on that agenda. And can I just reflect on my sort of experience of just one part of it over the last 6 months as acting chair, but an opportunity to meet lots of fantastic staff. Yeah, absolutely awesome. And the changes that we made in terms of leadership of service areas, clinical areas, has really benefited the organisation, but more importantly, benefited our patients immensely with improved quality experience outcomes. I know there's always more to do, but the journey over the last 18 months has been, second to none of the NHS. So when we received our not accreditation, but kind of the recognition as the most improved trust, it was on the basis of not just as a board, but what people do day in, day out within the organisation. And there's far too many for me to name here, and I'll obviously forget some, so I won't try and name any of them. And if there aren't any further questions or comments, we'll move on to the next item on the agenda, which is the provider collaborative update. Papers here are with us at a kind of high level and not the kind of level of detail that we wanted to see going forward. Perhaps we'll have a discussion in future in private board as well around the collaboration and what the challenges remain for. But one of the positives are that not only have we got an amazing new chair starting very soon, but Barts and Homerton chairs have also been appointed with a real focus on collaboration between the trust and making the APC work successfully going forward. Are there any questions, any comments on the APC papers? I could just absolutely ask Leslie straight away without waiting for your hand to go. Is there anyone else? Probably me and Leslie on this. Sue, Leslie and Sue.
So, and this was a comment, we had the same paper at Bots yesterday, and this is a comment I made at Bots. For completeness, I will make it here. I think it's really helpful to see the sorts of pieces of work that are happening and that collaboration that's underway, and it's incredibly useful to get a flavour of the work we're doing. I know it's early days at the moment, but as we get future reports, it would be really good to get some metrics, particularly metrics that are looking around health inequality, so we can actually measure the impact and the outcome that this work is happening. Because the descriptive stuff is really good, but it would be really interesting to see the and so what. And the other point, which I can't claim ownership of, but Kim, one of the board members at Barts made, which I think was a really good point, was about the real importance of this work moving at pace and using a kind of agile approach with sprints and things, so we don't take ages and ages to work out that something either is or isn't working, and that we work at speed to demonstrate success, because with our clinicians, if we do things and they are successful, then people are more likely to grow them. So it's how we get this working, and some kind of metrics that show us the impact that it's beginning to happen, accepting it's a bit too soon perhaps at the moment, but going forward to get some metrics, particularly around health inequalities.
Thanks. Thank you, Liz.
Thank you. Thank you for the report. Completely agree with Leslie about metrics. Two points from me, I think. This is clearly happening at a very high level. You've made that reference, Reboot. I think it would be really useful for the boards to perhaps get some insight into some of the quick wins that we could be achieving in this space. And we talked about and come back to me and that sort of working together quick win. I just think giving some meat on the bones about where this is actually making a difference here and now would be really, really useful. And then my second point, which is one I haven't made for a while, and I felt it was time to resurrect it. The agenda item is provider collaboration update. Actually, there's two other providers in North East London that we absolutely have to collaborate with more effectively than we currently are. And I know as a board, we are meeting with NELF quite soon to talk about that. But I'd quite like to see that being a more regular feature here, given that some of our particular challenges do actually relate to our collaboration with our mental health colleagues. So how can we start to drive that agenda forward?
Thanks, Sue and Leslie. Points well made. Would you like to respond?
I mean, I guess the mechanical thrombectomy is an interesting one. It's taken us 3 years to make it. So it's not, although it was a quick win in terms of we were given 2 weeks notice to stand the service up. We've been trying to build a collaborative service for 3 years. And
Might not be the best example.
yeah, so I feel it was really been working very well with Neil Ashman for a long last couple of weeks to work together. So some of the stuff, it takes a long time to get the right one. I take all these points. I think there's an interesting question for the coming year, given the scale of the operational, financial, digital challenges, etc. How we create the leadership time and space to do some of these things as well. Because lots of what's in here won't help us with those things this year. And it's how do we try to make sure we've got the time and space to focus on these things as well. I mean, the digital is a really good example of collaboration, actually, with bars. So it's, I guess some of this stuff is in here under the APC umbrella. Some of it was happening before the APC was thought of. Other is happening because of it. I guess we've just got to think about how we define collaboration over the coming months and years. The most successful collaborations in North East London are probably around things like cardiology, physical care, etc. Yet they don't get talked about necessarily in the APC umbrella. So I think there's a kind of pitching question about what we're doing.
I guess it relates to that. Given the scale of financial challenge, not just the HRMT, maybe not on the same scale yet, but I can't help believing Arts is not far behind. There must be things we're going to have to stop doing, rather than lose staff. And there's certain, follow-up would be an example of actually it's been a bugbear. But are there things that we can stop doing, which perhaps we could stop doing at an APC level? So you're setting a message out that's much clearer rather than, oh, if I can't do it here, I'll go down the road. And I was also really struck yesterday at the Bath board about how much cross-learning they get from the 4 sites, because it is quite a evolved model. And because we happen to be in Newham, Aminjit was gaining from going around the A&E at Newham to see what they'd done, as in putting majors in chairs, for example. There were some just little examples. And again, I think there's some of that cross-learning that at an APC level could be quite beneficial. So.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we are speaking regularly to them because there are things, for example, if we cap services in trust, that's the territory we're in. If you cap something in one place and don't cap elsewhere, it's great problems. We saw some of that in COVID where there was a lot of pathway restrictions put on in other trusts, and we suddenly saw referrals explode through the roof. So actually, we're in a position where if one of the acutes decides we can't afford to do this anymore, we need to make sure that we all stop doing it.
Yeah.
We decide where it's going to be provided as well. So that I think lots of the APC conversation this year may well be as much about what we can stop doing as well as what we can do.
And on your point, Matthew, around all the challenges that we have, as well as collaborating at system and at place level, we one of the issues that we need to resolve is the governance around that. As a board, you need to be cited on regional site government at place level, our integration with our partners there, what's successful, what's working, what's the metrics around it, what impact are we making on that. So we'll start that conversation properly next month. It's been recommended to me that the mental health collaboration is much more mature, much more developed, has a patient voice in there as well. Primary care is represented. Now around the APC table, we don't have some of those important key stakeholders. So it's still a journey to develop the governance as well as the delivery around APC as well. So watch that space. Next item, maternity services update. Catherine, over to you and your colleagues on the screen.
That's right. So there's a number of potential colleagues on the screen, but Thompson's actually going to take us through this paper.
Great, thank you very much. I'm sorry we can't join in person. It was due to a diary clash and not being able to get over to King George's, and I hope you can hear me okay. Yeah, brilliant. So thank you for receiving this report. It provides a quarterly update on the maternity service. Just to flag that the data is a little old. We're reporting on the October data because this is a December report. As you know, we continuously monitor our outcomes, and one of those is related to our stillbirth and neonatal death outcomes. Stillbirth rate in October was 3.2 per 100,000, per 1,000, and we found that there was no significant change in that. A large part of the work that we're doing in the maternity service at the moment is around looking at equality and equity, and so we have been looking at the perinatal outcomes for those from the global majority, and we've got a lot of ongoing work in this area. We've done a thematic review in relation to that, and we found in actual fact that deprivation had the biggest impact in terms of outcomes for those women. There was some discussion earlier in the meeting around translation services, and in the thematic review we did for this period of time, we didn't find that translation services appeared to have an impact. We're working really hard to ensure that all of our incidents are reviewed and actioned in a timely manner, and that duty of candour is completed as appropriate. And we continue to work within the PISA framework. We're incorporating work to reduce inequalities where it's highlighted in the investigations. All cases are reported to MNSI as required, and as you heard from Dawn earlier, that we're working really closely with patients and families at the moment to try and incorporate their feedback into our investigation processes. The themes and actions related to incidents are mostly around medication errors, fetal monitoring and delays in care, and we've got action plans looking at all of those aspects of the service that we deliver. You'll probably be aware that we had an unannounced CQC inspection in October to the maternity services, and following that we did receive a Section 31 letter of intent. We were able to put forward a strong action plan to mitigate the concerns that were raised. I'm pleased to say that CQC accepted our mitigations. Issues raised by the CQC were primarily around triage and risk assessment, and also some concerns around capacity during times of surge within the maternity service. The progress against the CQC actions presented in this report are actually against the 2021 CQC report. We're yet to receive the most recent CQC report. We think that that will probably land with us in March or April time, and of course we will update the action plan accordingly. We continue to work with our transformation team around the actions that we've put in place, immediate actions that we've put in place following the visit in October. Training remains one of our areas of focus, and in this report you'll see that we had some concerns about whether we would be on target to meet the 90% compliance for MDT training, and I'm really pleased to say that we did in fact meet that. We continuously monitor our safe staffing levels. Our midwifery vacancy rate remains around about 6%. Really delighted to say that 9 out of our current students have been recruited into the service, and so I hope that reflects the positive experience that they have when they are with us. You've heard in quite a lot of detail around patient family feedback from Dawn. We've got active action plans to address patient feedback that we receive. In the report, it does mention that we've not had any Regulation 28 notices from the coroners, but I'm sure many of you will be aware of the recent media coverage around 2 cases that have been have got inquests open at the Coroner's Court. We had a case that was heard in the Coroner's Court in December. That was quite a challenging case for us. We didn't receive a Regulation 28 notice, but there was quite a lot of discussion around theatre capacity whilst we were preparing for that case, and that was flagged as a particular risk by our legal team. We've submitted our data for MIS or CNST, as you may know it, for Year 6. We've been asked for a little bit of additional information regarding Safety Action 9. That's the safety action that relates to board reporting, but we're fairly optimistic that once we've submitted the data that will be accepted, and we hope that we'll be on track to achieve all 10 safety actions for MIS Year 6. We continue to review all of our term admissions to the neonatal unit in order that we can reduce the separation of mothers and babies, and I'm pleased to say that we are below the national target for admission of term babies to the neonatal unit, and as with all of our work streams, we've got an action plan to address this. So that's a summary of the maternity services report. I don't have anything else I want to add, but happy to take any questions.
Thank you. Thanks very much, Catherine. Martha, is there anything you'd like to add as our maternity champion before I open it?
Yes, a couple of things that were mentioned in the report that we just heard. We're very pleased with the outcome on training. However, it was a struggle, in particular, while our nursing staff centre training was 90% and went over 90%. There was a real struggle with the medical side of training. We did meet the targets by the end of the year with a lot of hard work put in by Manta and by Catherine and a lot of stamping of feet. But the discussion that we had earlier this week is how do we ensure that we don't end up in the same position at the end of this year. So there will continue to be a focus on training within the measures. The issue on translation services also came up. There were 2 cases recently that were investigated, translation service future. So I think that's an area where some solutions are required. And again, also, this is something I've raised before, the availability of theatre space because of the impact it has on planned cesarean section operations, which then need to be rescheduled eventually as emergency cesarean section operations. So as we recognised last year, and it's now featuring in one, this is something which we need to find a more consistent solution. We were told that evening sessions were being put on twice a week, but it seems to me from discussions that we've had around the table that some of the challenges always are relying on the goodwill of staff to actually volunteer to do those sessions, which means that potentially they may not always be available. So again, it's a resourcing issue, and I'm sure that the executive team are aware of it. Ultimately, we need another theatre space, but as we know, there are real constraints on capital investment. Enable us to provide that.
Thanks very much, Steve. Any other comments from Will? Will, thank you. Over to you. Will?
Hi. Just to respond to Martha's point about the obstetric theatres. So over the last year, we've been trying our best to meet demand more quickly when we need it. Excess demand presents itself. So previously, we were putting on additional weekend sessions. What we've done is introduce far more twilight sessions during the week when we actually require it. So patients are waiting less time. And that is having an impact in terms of our responsiveness and bringing down the wait times for elective C-sections. So that's providing a better patient experience and better patient care. Martha's absolutely right that in the past we are, and we still are, relying on the goodwill of staff to pick up on those twilight sessions. So for that reason, we've taken a paper to IRG and received approval to job plan twilight sessions twice a week to ensure that we aren't relying on the goodwill of staff and that we can have more assurance that we will have that capacity when we need it. So those 2 steps in terms of putting on far more twilights and stopping this reliance on weekends, which makes us more responsive and reduces the responsive, meets demand more quickly, and also job planning those twilight sessions goes some way to mitigate the risk. But as you point out, the only way to really mitigate the risk around emergency demand is for it to build a third theatre. The two risks are slightly different. So we've mitigated one, but the other remains.
Thanks very much, Will. Catherine, anything you want to add? Ron?
Yeah, one of the things that Dawn mentioned when she was talking to us was that when things go wrong, we have a PSAF investigation. If the patient is unhappy with the outcome of that, they have to raise a complaint as the only remedy to take further. With our PSAF, as it's laid out, we have a great deal of patient involvement in the whole process, right through to the very end. And I would hope that would alleviate that. Has that ever happened in our trust here?
Shall I take that? In maternity, it's quite challenging, I think, when we have an incident that meets the threshold for a PSII, so that's a full investigation. Very often those are investigated by MNSI, and that's an external investigation. And obviously that's really good for patients because it provides that sort of external scrutiny and level of assurance. But it does unfortunately mean that the process becomes a little bit disconnected from the trust. So one of the things actually that I've just spoken to Dawn about earlier this week is how Dawn can help us with patients not only raising their concerns, but navigating the process, much of which is outside of our control as a trust to change in terms of things like timescales. So MNSI, in terms of patient engagement, MNSI meet with the patient or the family, and they input into the terms of reference of an investigation. And usually prior to that, we will have met with the family and had, debriefed, and they will have had an opportunity to put any questions or concerns forward. And often we're also able to flag those to MNSI to be incorporated into their investigation. We will then often have local resolution meetings or meetings if a patient raises a complaint. We don't have control over what MNSI choose to put in their terms of reference. And so often what happens is we then pick up any other concerns that fall out of the scope. And we try and do that through local resolution and meeting. But you are right, often that falls under the complaints process because a family are not satisfied with the initial response or information that we've given to them. But we do try and give as much information and maintain as close contact as we can out with of the complaints process, because we know that is problematic and difficult for patients and their families.
Okay, I understand it's essentially because it's being taken out of our hands and being dealt by MNSI. Because
yes.
A patient safety incident investigation within the trust, and we are totally in control of that ourselves. The patient's voice goes right through that, like the lettering through Blackpool Rock, and there's no point where the patient's voice isn't heard. So I was surprised that didn't happen in maternity as well, but you explained that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Catherine. And thank you for this report. One of the things that I just want to say is want to keep an eye on the training. So looking at Catherine and Andrew, and I know that I've been briefed, and this is probably something for a future meeting, on the new arrangements of risk and your two teams working much more collaboratively together going forward and assured around picking up risks such as that. Brilliant. Well, thanks, Will and Catherine and colleagues on Teams. Feel free to stay on for the rest of the meeting. It's always a very interesting meeting. Maybe personal development opportunities, as I would say. And we'll move on to the next item, our digital update. David.
Yes, Chef. So the brief report with regards to our current digital team and the performance of that is that we've put a lot of effort into trying to improve our service desk and the response rates that we're getting there. We are starting to close the gap finally with regards to first-time fix rates. That has increased over month on month. And we're getting, some anecdotal feedback that the response from the service desk is improving. Alongside that, in previous months, we've actually been able to close all the calls that were logged, which I think is the first time being able to do that. In terms of our infrastructure, that's remaining largely stable, and that's in spite of the fact that we are in the process of doing the major network upgrade. I'm pleased to say that we have now turned on the new Wi-Fi and moved the whole of King George and the whole of Queen's Festival over onto the new Wi-Fi now, which is now working well, and really there was minimal disruption as part of that switchover, which I think was an impressive feat by the teams and by the supplier block. So we're on target to complete that network rollout by the end of the month. In terms of the EPR itself, so we have now entered into a phase called integration testing phase 1, whereby we're testing all the downstream systems, sending data across all those systems following a series of scenarios. I think we've got about 16 various scenarios, which encompass somewhere in the region of about 400 test plans. And those all trigger data, it triggers it across the whole system. And we're in the process of doing that. We will be concluding that testing at the end of next week, and we'll have a view on how successful that's been. Completing that and coming out of that test phase, meeting certain criteria, then will indicate whether we're continuing to remain on June or whether further testing and remediation is required. So, and at this point in time, the team are working hard to clear all the outstanding issues. The other thing that we've really ramped up and we're starting to get very good engagement is around clinical and operational readiness. The corgis are working well. We've now got a clinical operational readiness board, which met in January, and again, we're getting some very clear actions that are coming out of those boards in terms of ensuring that the organisation is happy with its readiness to accept the new system, understand what SOPs need to be developed, and what changes need to take place, and therefore what training is needed. So we're moving through that. Some feedback from that. We do a piece of work just defining the scope of our rollout of electronic medicines management. A piece of work has just been concluded on that. So the EPR continues at pace. I think I'm still cautiously confident in the June date, but obviously we do have people issues, process issues, and technology, as you'd expect. It's a program of this complexity and size, and there's always the potential for something to come along that may derail things, but at the same time we're working in the right direction. And I just wanted to call out, I think the board and the trust have to recognise that there is an inherent risk in meeting the financial challenge in implementing that digital transformation, particularly around morale, particularly around the impacts of any cost savings. So it's just worth calling that particular point out. The final piece to report on is information governance. So just to recap, back in June, the organisation was issued with a notice from the Information Commissioner's Office about the level of our freedom of information request backlog. We were given an enforcement notice which required us to complete that or clear that backlog down by December 2024. We have now completed that on target. We've written to the ICO, who's thanked us for our compliance, and then asked us to give a review of how they've handled it from their end. So I think that concludes where we are there.
you very much, David. Any questions, any comments to David? Leslie?
It's just a very quick comment that when we did our visit today, I have never met a more enthusiastic member of staff who bounded up to us and said, I am so excited about EPR. I just can't wait for it.
They look like David.
No? Most definitely not. I introduced her to David and he talked to her about Tessie and said, can I be involved in that? So he's had to take her name because she is so keen to be involved. But actually the whole group of staff we met were just so excited about what EPR. So I think to me that just says something about how our communication has been with staff and how actually when David said, yeah, it'll be June, and her first question was, can't it be any sooner? So actually, the fact that we've got staff that are now chomping at the bit, because the most difficult thing about implementing something, this is all about people. And if you've got staff that are enthusiastic and want to make it work because they can see the benefits of making it work, then that's half the job done.
It's interesting, sorry to cut in, as you said, because I was one with David, and they hadn't had their records, electronic records management system visit yet. So they sort of knew about it, but didn't know. They had to put it off because they had a planned day of very intensive operations.
Clementina was positively bouncing.
Excellent. Sue?
Thank you. So I was going to make the point that Leslie's made, but also just to add, we've, since the last board meeting, stood up the non-executive governance arrangements around this and have met twice within BHRUT and once across BHRUT and BART. So it's early days, but the wind of change is blowing in the right direction. And I think we are taking the opportunity to scrutinise in more depth some of the risks that David is highlighting here today. So we're up and running, is all I'm going to say. Thank you.
Thank you. I mean, great stuff. So I don't want to be the one who puts a damper on stuff, but it is a massive change programme, massive change project, lots of moving parts, and always will be various gateways to get through between now and June. And just to reiterate from last week or week before, digital board oversight meeting, is we will make the changeover when we know that we're ready to do so. While I said aspirational to go for June, we know that there are implications for not meeting in June, and there are potential consequences if we're not ready for that. And what I want colleagues and board to know that there isn't a single organisation that's had this sort of massive change, and things have not fallen down temporarily. And it's about how quickly we recover, as opposed to expecting nothing to go astray during that really high risk period. So I know David and colleagues have worked in flat out on that, but I just wanted to set the sort of the context and the tone that yes, the board has your back, your full support, but we're also very pragmatic and understanding about the potential risks around that time as well. Brilliant. So moving on to the next item, which is the first of our chair reports. So over to you, Hilary, for your last report.
Thanks, Mahbub. And given we've just heard the maternity services review, which overlaps, I think, quite a lot, and we have a number of reports that you'll see which have been disseminated to the board, which were all considered at back, which was at the end of November. Other than mentioning the two items for escalation, again, we covered the electric capacity for cesareans and also the translation services and connectivity, which go to page 8 of the report are there. Really nothing else to comment on, but I'm very conscious that this was the end of November, and then we've had the busiest month in the District Trust, and probably January will prove to be even busier. And so at my regular catch-ups with Andrew and Catherine, we were talking about almost a big review of maternity potentially, and I'm conscious the ICB is doing it at that level, but maybe it's another little thing for the APC to think about, because I think maternity capacity across North East London is going to have to be looked at, given the financial position, etc. So really nothing more to add on that. And I will hand back to you, probably in the interest of time.
Thank you very much, Hilary. Are there any questions or comments to Hilary's report? If we could-
We'll be welcoming Caroline to our next meeting in 2 weeks' time, as well as an additional member of.
Brilliant.
It's great.
Really good. Thank you, Caroline, for taking on the extra duties. Take the reports as read. Are there any questions, any comments on these reports? Ron, were you about to say something, or were you just?
No, I was just looking through them, I read through them, and I was reflecting on the fact that we're losing Tara O'Regan, one of our heads of patient safety, and he's been a really huge voice in implementing PISA, which is now going to work for NHS England, I think. And it's going to be a terrible loss. I've reflected on the way that we've gone forward with some of this stuff and the part she's had to play in. I'd just like to perhaps this is an appropriate time to recall our thanks, and from the patient's point of view, the thanks for the work she's done.
Yeah, thank you. Well, I'll second that, and we'll have it recorded in minutes. So thank you for raising that. Kathleen, to send a message on behalf of the board as well. Because not everyone reads our minutes, unfortunately. We move on to item 15, which is the integrated quality and safety report of the.
I've heard that a lot of the items in this report have already been covered. I wasn't to mention it yet, actually. Our PISA review has shown that we've done very well with PISA and we're well ahead of the game in with lots of other organisations in the country, so that's good for us. I also wanted to mention patient feedback. We obviously have the national patient surveys, but we have our regular feedback from patients. And I think despite the difficulties that we've had in the ED that have been well documented, our feedback actually from patients is continuing to improve. So I don't know whether their expectations have lowered, but certainly when they come in, they're saying that they're having good care. Andrew and I are working very closely together, along with Kerry, who's the lead quality safety on phasing down our incidents. We've got quite a backlog in the tail, as you can see from this report, in terms of clinical incidents, ready incidents, after action reviews, etc. So we set up regular meetings with Kerry, and we're really trying to work with the clinical groups on getting those back into a more reasonable time frame. In terms of infection control, we're doing relatively well with that. I think had quite a high number of CDIs at the beginning of the year. They're now coming down within the expected range. We've had a lot of norovirus locally, but we haven't had yet, which has been good, although we have had some. And then partly of that maternity leave, but I wasn't going to repeat that because we've already had 2.
Questions, any comments on Catherine's integrated quality and safety report? Thank you. Then who would you like to present people in culture? Also, just to mention the GMC paper here for completeness, we committee received in September, but just to ensure proper transparency and public governance. Let's just.
Yes, so this was a meeting we held in November. And a number of the items appear on the agenda anyway, but a good discussion on statutory mandatory training. The freedom to speak up, again, which I think appears on our agenda anyway. And medical education, and you've talked about the GMC report, and you say that's there for completeness, but the response rate was a significant improvement on previous years, and clinical oncology were actually commended by NHS England as an area of best practice and had shown the most sustained improvement from 21 to 24, which is really good news to hear. And I think we have made significant progress in medical education, which is good to see. And the matter arising, or an outstanding item that we had earlier, the equality standard progress update also include progress on the sexual safety charter. And I think the other thing that will be positive, which we will hear more about, is that we do know, and we verbal update, that the staff survey had closed, just about to close when we had this report, and our response rate was up again in terms of the numbers of our staff that reported to the staff survey, which I think, well, we'll have to wait to see, but I think augurs well, because generally the more people that are engaged and respond to things, the better outcomes we get. We'll find that out probably by the time we have our next board meeting in March. But again, I think there's significant progress being made across medical education, which is positive. Certainly got Freedom to Speak Up, which Sue's been a big champion of, where we're getting more and more positive, and in terms of hopefully the work we've been doing on leadership, which finds its way into people feeling much keener to respond to the staff survey and hopefully being much more positive. Thanks.
Are there any questions, any comments to Leslie on her report, but also on item 16A, any questions and comments for Andrew? Not. And welcome Paul. Our Freedom Speak Up Guardian 6-month report. Paul, feel free to present when you're ready, followed by any comments from Sue, then we can open up for completion.
Thank you. I'll take the report as read. The 6-month report between the 1st of April 2024 and the 30th of September 2024 saw 85 new concerns being raised. This is above average for similar sized trusts, but in line with the improved rate of concerns recorded at BHRUT in recent years. By the way, that comparison is made per capita with other acute trusts. Since this period, we've had the usual bump in concerns being raised at this time of year. All of the extra promotion with the Freedom to Speak Up month in October, that normally helps to spike the numbers a little. And there are also a few departments where multiple staff are regularly raising concerns at the moment, and they're putting forward suggestions for improvement also, which is currently being responded to in various ways. And all of these together have tipped the current total to just over 150 cases. If the rate of concerns continues to remain at that level for the next few months, then the annual total will be very similar to what we've seen in the last 2 years at BHRUT. The confidentiality data continues to show improved trust in the Guardian service as a psychologically safe route for speaking up, with only 1% of staff choosing to withhold their name from the Guardian. If you've had time to read the report, you would have seen a graph in there which illustrates quite significant improvement over the last few years in terms of trust and using the service. Positive experiences shared via word of mouth by using the Guardian service continues to impact on the numbers coming through. Many new cases coming from colleagues who have previously benefited from using the service. The majority of staff chose to speak up to the Guardian service because they felt they were not being listened to, would not be listened to, or were fearful of potential detriments happening to them if they spoke up via other internal channels. The 3 top job groups raising concerns were nursing midwifery, medical and dental, and allied and health professionals. And the 3 most common themes for new cases were management issues, system and process, and patient safety. Of course, one of the most important factors contributing to a well-functioning speak-up culture is the speed and quality of responses to raising concerns. There's been some good examples since the beginning of the year where the trust have demonstrated that they are listening by responding to concerns quickly and attempting to address them. And this definitely contributes positively to staff having more belief and confidence in coming forward with their concerns and ideas to make things better. However, it remains that in some instances, staff reported their frustrations regarding the quality and or the speed of the responses from the trust. And the trust really has progressed quite significantly in this area, but there is still room for improvement. It must also be said that in some cases, the issues being raised are quite challenging to address quickly for a variety of issues, including the resources that are available to the trust. But where necessary, we keep listening and talking to appropriate staff within the trust to try and keep the focus in the areas that need or appears to need a bit more attention. And in practice, this can sometimes lead to smaller steps towards improvement rather than radical leaps, but it is positive development nonetheless. Does anyone have any questions or comments regarding the report?
Thanks very much, Paul. I'll just bring Sue in and then we'll open up for any comments.
Thank you. So I've got very little to add to Paul's summary. We are moving in the right direction, and that is evident in quite an array of metrics. I think the challenges for us as an organisation remain consistent, but we need to find a way to be more agile in responding to items as they are raised and to bring them to conclusion more quickly, because it is really clear that our credibility is impacted by the time we spend in responding to queries raised. But that is well known and is being acted upon, but it isn't the most straightforward thing to address. Just to add, I did a Freedom to Speak Up visit last week to Barking Community Hospital, and that was a very positive experience, and had a great opportunity to speak to colleagues there. And I do think the word is getting out, and I do see on the ground that staff are more confident in speaking up, more aware of the channels that are available to them to speak up. So I think we are moving in the right direction.
Thank you. Do I thank you for the work that you've done on Leslie?
Yeah, and it's just a quick comment, and Paul picked it up, and I think it's absolutely reflective of the way our service is delivered here and the support that Sue gives to Paul. But the small graph under section 8 on confidentiality, if you look that in 2021-22, which was not that long ago, 40% of staff were not confident to give their names, and we're down to 1% now. So I think that gap from 40 to 14 to 4 to 1 over a 4-year period actually reflects that people now feel confidence in the service and are now willing to actually say who they are, because they believe A, it'll be kept confidential, and B, something will happen as a result. So I just think that's a really positive sign.
Thanks. Thanks, Leslie. Margaret.
Thank you for the report. I was just wondering, the back end of last year, we had a new campaign about sexual harassment. So I was actually wondering whether or not any impact had been seen in the issues that have been referred to you.
In terms of concerns being raised, no. It is an underreported issue. We've had some discussions recently about why people often opt to suffer in silence or leave the situation without reporting. It's something that we've got some further work to do later on. I think in the next month or so, I think we're meeting on this subject. So I think there is a fair bit of work still needed to do, not just at this trust, across the whole of the NHS. You know, it is a well-known issue that goes underreported.
Yeah, is it on the same issue?
Just
to
explain. So we will be looking very closely at the people survey, because this will be the second year that the question specifically around sexual harassment is asked, and that will give us further insight into the work that we're doing, in addition to obviously the conversations that Paul is having, and that sense that it perhaps is.
Thank you again, Paul. I think, although a lot of this report makes uncomfortable reading, I think that we are seeing the green shoots from the work around just culture, taking a very thorough approach to case management, which is sometimes very complex. And sometimes doing these things, they're the really difficult things, and the things that go under, that, you know, they do go under the radar. And if you look into, you know, to some of the issues that have been brought, you can equally imagine very much what the other side is saying, so that these things can be really, you know, really challenging. But I think that some of that, you know, we're beginning to see some real progress from some of that work, but there's still the long tail where things, you know, perhaps have been done differently, some, you know, considerable time ago. But it's having the confidence to pursue that task, and it's actually, you know, it can sometimes be very, very challenging. But I think the fact that we are seeing these things gives me some real cause for optimism.
Thanks, Caroline. That's really helpful point. Now, on paragraph 15, we've got a series of recommendations, and this just might be my memory on this, but I would just seek an assurance that these recommendations are then responded to, and they go back via the Leslie's committee.
They do.
Yeah.
This is the report we had at PCC, and these got picked up at PCC, and we get quarterly reports at PCC, and we pick these things up.
Are you specifically pick up the recommendation and organisation response? Yeah.
Just say, I mean, you know, I think Paul's a great sort of critical friend to the organisation. Actually, also attends the exec committee, and the issues that come up here are also picked up within the exec as well. So they're very much followed through. And I think the Guardian's become a real strength actually to us in terms of managing some of these concerns. But I should say, while operating in that kind of independent spirit, where we are properly held to account and challenged where appropriate.
I think when, as Lieutenant Chairman, having had meetings with you, Paul, that's been helpful to give me a steer on areas to look at in my interactions as well. So having an independent proxy service, very helpful. So thank you very much, colleagues, and thank you very much, Paul, for presenting that report and your work. We'll see you again.
Thank you. Bye.
FIC, November and December. Sorry, there's the review tool. Apologies, Janine. Got ahead of myself there.
Yeah, so this builds on the need for us to provide assurance that we are enabling staff to speak up, and that we are making full use of our obligations regarding the Freedom to Speak Up Guardian service, and how we listen and respond to that feedback. So the paper that you have is our, it's a self-review tool. So this is our take on where we are, and we are bringing this to the board for board agreement and sign. So the key thing is that that as board, you feel sufficiently cited on the Freedom to Speak Up and the processes that we have in place.
Thank you very much, Janine. Would anyone wish to make any comments, anything on the report? It is really helpful having this, because at times, we think we've got lots of stuff that Sue brings in, reports come back, and other colleagues make comments on. Having a piece of governance here that wraps it all up and gives us the assurance that recommendations are acted upon and implemented. Helpful indeed. So we don't have any comments, then we'll accept the report and move on to Sue presenting Finance, Investment, Performance Committee reports from the 2 months that you've got here.
Thank you. Although I was just scanning through my report, and I think largely the component parts of it are all coming to board either in public or private. So I'm not sure that I want to repeat what colleagues will say when we look at the detailed papers. In financial terms, whilst we continue to push hard with our plan, we are behind plan, albeit our trajectory is improving. But I think it's fair to say that we're moving into the hardest part of the year. So our ability to sustain that improvement is going to be challenged, there is no doubt. And we are obviously starting to turn our thoughts to what next year might look like. And there have been a number of references to that during the meeting thus far. Not only did we receive finance report, we received integrated performance reports and also workforce reports. All of those are on the agenda in their own right today. We either reviewed or received for the first time a number of business cases, some of which will appear in the private part of the board. We did agree move forward on the investment in the gynae patient waiting list, which has already been to board, but we have specifically asked that we see benefit realisation reported to Finance Committee on that in April, that first phase of investment. You have received already a report on digital. You will shortly be receiving reports on annual goals. We have kicked the tyres on several BAF risks that sit under the auspices of this committee. And I think it is fair to say that as we move into the new planning year, we need to put in a bit more detailed thought about refreshing those BAF risks as we move forward. But that would be true for all committees. I don't think I want to highlight anything else because otherwise I'll be stealing the thunder of my colleagues who are going to present various reports. So,
Yeah, don't want to steal.
Mike or Fiona or Janine's thunder.
Yeah, yeah,
Do
yeah,
it
yeah.
anyway.
No. So thank you. Thank you very much, Sue, for that. We'll take sort of when we've done the finance stuff as well, and any further comments back to. So over to Fiona, integrated performance report.
Very much. And not so much thunder in here, but some consistently good stories. So we started the meeting, I think, saying the risks were EPR money and operational resilience. And I think on the one hand, this is a really good news story for the organisation. It shows improvement, it shows sustained improvement, and up to now it shows that we've managed the darker months, the colder months with continued delivery in terms of performance metrics. It also tells us where we've got more work to do, and I think that going forward, this is going to be a really important document demonstrating if we're managing money, risk around EPR, and maintaining the safety and the quality of the services that we provide to patients, including access. So this is an important document, and I'm going to take you through it. I'm going to try not to repeat what Matthew said. He told us quite a lot about ED earlier. But essentially, the all types performance, as Matthew said, we're doing well. We've continued to do well, and we've sustained that for about a year now. Part of that is our type 3 provider PELP working very closely with us. Some of that is our type 2 performance in ophthalmology and gynae. And if you move to the second slide, we do still have a lot of work to do on type 1, which is our emergency ED only activity. We're at the lower end of the pack in London in terms of performance compared to our peers. And my consistent objective here is to improve everything we do in our A&E departments, both sites, different issues, but with a plan for change, lots going on in that space. And the one thing I have to say, although I will repeat what Matthew said earlier, but the commitment the staff have shown over the winter months, the fact that we've maintained performance and not dropped, and levels of personal and departmental commitment that really need to be applauded. So yes, I think that these data need more work, but I do think we shouldn't miss the level of commitment that's delivered some of these metrics. The type 2 performance is in the next slide, which shows you the journey that gynecology have been on, which is a bit of a rocky road for the last year. You can see dips and troughs all over the place, but basically they've redesigned the service for women presenting with emergency gynecological issues, and they are now sustaining good levels of performance, and that's what we're here to do. There's some environmental issues in that area, which is not really fit for purpose. So capital wise, we will be seeing if we can eke out a bit of money to make that a better space for women to wait. In eyes, our eye department have been flying high for a while, and I'm really pleased to see them sustain that. It's a walk-in eye service, which most hospitals don't provide. And so we're doing very well, and they do need some recognition there. Sustained improvement is really what we're all about. We know about ambulance conveyances, and we know that the top graph on slide 5 shows us what we already know, which is that there are more ambulances coming into our hospitals on both sides, and that has been seen for quite a while now. Lots of other things going on in ED, and we've talked about some of them today, about what we're going to do about that, how we're going to manage that activity, and what we're going to do to improve. The focus has been very much on making sure that ambulances don't wait a long time to hand over the patients, and I think we demonstrate that. We are a good receiver of ambulances, and we do take the patient's care into our ED department relatively quickly compared to national, but also it's a level of commitment from our ED teams towards the London Ambulance Service and the East of England. So lots of work to do still there, lots of measurement to do still there, but ongoing, a good story had along the way. This is more of a quality metric, but the average time in the ED is something that is directly connected to the type 1 performance, and just shows us that even though we improved how long patients stay in our department a while ago, there are still really long waits and patients spend far too long in our corridors and in our main departments. And so again, the focus of our UEC programme, which Ron reminded me today, the board is today, and that was very bad timing, and thank you, we won't do that again. But essentially, lots and lots of work to do in UEC, both at a system level and a level 1 place level. We have talked in the past quite considerably about mental health patient conveyance, and I suppose this is November's data, so I think there have been some considerable improvements in mental health conveyances in the recent weeks. However, you know, the figures are stark, and our King George site still remains, relatively speaking, quite a high level, a high provider of Section 136 mental health presentations, and that probably does need lots and lots more work in the coming months. Notwithstanding, though, the support we've been having from the ICB and from NELFT in terms of getting into that space and really trying to make a difference. There's a site summary, one for King George's and one for Queen's, and the only thing I really want to point out there is the bottom right graph, which shows fantastic improvement on both sides. The bottom right-hand graph is the culmination of all the perfect weeks that we do, weeks where we have interagency work programs to reduce the number of patients who could be discharged from hospital medically safe and therefore need to leave the acute bed so we can use it for somebody else, but also go back to the place where it's most appropriate for their care. And so that shows you that all this interagency work, all of the place-based work, all the conversations we have about making sure patients leave the hospital safely in a timely fashion is working. And you will see that King George's and Queen's shows significant reduction in that number of patients. And that's what is helping us improve the general experience of everybody who's admitted to both our sites. I'll move on to RTT, which is a well-trodden path for us. We do very well in this space, and we are highly rewarded for the work that we do in terms of elective and planned care. The good graph is the one with the blue going down and the orange going up, which essentially shows you that our 18-week performance is improving and the size of our waiting list is going down. That is a really good news story because it means that we've got high levels of validation. It means that we're treating people chronologically and that we're ending pathways in a timely fashion. And giving a nod to what Hilary said earlier about not doing so many follow-ups, that's what happens when you do that kind of work. It's hard to do, specialty specific and sometimes person specific, but these are the tools that we have available to us to reduce our waiting list. Some more good news around 52-week waiters, which we know is a problem and we are committed to solving. We are seeing a reduction. I'm delighted to see that. Lots more work to do, but talking to the gynae investment that we've just made, many of the patients waiting over a year for care in our hospital are women waiting for gynecology services. And so the investment connected to the performance and the patient experience is a lovely story to show how we're all joined up and that we're talking about the right things in the right committees, making the right decisions. That does need to reduce. We have a target of 1% of our overall PTL for 52-week patients, and so we're not just under halfway there in terms of delivering that target, but we've got a bit to go. DMO1 is our diagnostic waiting time, and that is the key to good quality planned care, good quality cancer care. And the quicker you investigate and diagnose people, as you know, the sooner we can treat them. It's a nothing to see here scenario again, and I'm really delighted with that. The teams work through huge numbers. There's 10,000 patients on our DMO1 waiting list, and 4.1% of those patients are not seen within 6 weeks. That's quite an achievement. Multi-specialty and multi-part. Very, very good news. And sustained. The thing I came to the trust to deliver almost 3 years ago, or not, was to improve theatre utilisation. That was my first objective, given jointly to me by Nick Swift and Matthew. We are really doing very well on utilising the expensive assets that are theatres. 26 sessions were fallow, excuse me. Out of 770, that is really, really, really high levels of productivity, high levels of utilisation, and testament to all of the theatre teams, the surgical clinical group, and the specialties for, you know, use it or lose it scenarios, and they certainly do use it and use it well. The second graph is around utilisation of time. And, you know, there are many factors that influence that, but essentially across the board, we use all our theatres effectively and we use the time within them well. And so I do like to keep that slide in, although, you know, it might get a bit boring occasionally if we just keep telling ourselves we're great. But it's an important metric for planned care, and we should never forget to look into that space just to make sure we're doing well. Finally, we've got cancer. Cancer services are you know, a huge mix of different people doing different things in different parts of the pathway. So we're doing really well, and I know Matthew gave a shout out to the cancer team for really pulling some of that performance up. One of the areas I will mention, however, is patients who have waited longer than 62 days for a diagnosis or for treatment to start. So hugely well done to the cancer team. However, the focus of our work going forward needs to be in reducing over 62-day breaches and understanding the complexity of the pathways that are leading to patients waiting more than 62 days for a diagnosis. And I'm giving myself work to do here, but that's where we're going to go next. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Fiona. Any questions, any comments from colleagues on the Leslie and Caroline, please?
Just a couple. Just looking at the this one.
Yeah, DMO1.
Yes. There's two really 424 people waiting over 6 weeks, but two very chunky numbers that make up the bulk of that. So, and I noticed that in the commentary it says we're doing something about it. So I suppose just a little bit more sense of how long is this going to take? Is it a case of we need more people, or we need more machinery, or what do we need to get those numbers down around basically MRI and isn't it? And whether or not they've kind of taken impact on those people. If I guess some of them it's over 6 weeks, some of them may be quite a long time over 6 weeks, some might be 6.5 weeks. So it's where it lies. And the other one was the kind of perennial people mental health places that are in our ED. When we had the same report yesterday at Barts, they'd had noticeable decreases. And I asked the question whether it was a kind of fortuitous decrease, because things never grow throughout the year. So sometimes you can get just a decrease because you get a decrease in next month we'll be back up again. But certainly in the case of Newham, which is where we were, it was actually because of a change and a change in the pathway and a change in the working arrangements and what they've done. Leading to people staying for a long time. So I wondered where we were in that, are our numbers still erratic, not because we're erratic, but just because numbers are erratic?
Yeah.
Or is there something that we are doing that is actually leading to a decrease?
I have two questions. One was around the data you have where people presented at ED and weren't admitted. Is there any sense, and apologies if I've missed it somewhere, around people who are not admitted or who are coming back around the same thing? Would there have been an impact if they had been admitted at the time? That was one question, and the other question was if you could say a bit about the and you mentioned it here around the colorectal skin pathways remaining challenged due to patient choice as well as capacity. I understand the capacity thing, but could you say a bit more about the patient choice element in that?
In cancer, so you're talking about?
Yeah, so it was just the line about patient patient choice.
And
What impact that has on the when you're trying to provide service.
in terms of the qualities, have we got any patients with learning disabilities on PTL and how long have they been waiting for?
Good job, I wrote all those questions. Okay, so, sorry.
Well, just to marry them up.
Go for it.
Yeah, it was on the RTT thing, talking about the waiting list validation, just thinking about that theme of what are we going to stop doing? 25%, I think it is, or more of knee replacements have adverse patient reported outcome measures. So we probably shouldn't be doing that 25%. And if you, again, it might be one to do at APC level, but, taking the waiting list and saying to people surgery might not be the answer seems like a very sensible thing to do. And I don't know if we're doing any of that. The surgeons like to operate. So maybe somebody else should have a conversation.
Okay. So in terms of the DMO1, the MRI breaches, Leslie, are just normal variation in offering. So there'll be people who can't come, have gone on holiday and all sorts of things. The DMO1 target is an aggregate score deliberately to allow the kind of ebbs and flows of different services doing different things. So if that was 500, I would say we've got a problem in MRI because it isn't. The other thing to say is that we do have and have offered considerable options around choice of venue. So the CDC at Barking is open, the CDC at St George's is now open, they've both got MRI. We've got MRI at Queen's, we've got MRI at King George's. So in terms of what our service offering is, I'm confident that we've got enough venues and enough capacity to deliver. So I think MRI, I would say, is okay. Nothing to concern me there. Sleep studies is an interesting one because majority of those study requests come from primary care. In fact, almost all of them, with some coming from a pre-assessment, surgical pre-assessment appointments too. So there are two things going on in sleep studies. We're working with David's team around a digital option around the management and the oversight of sleep study reporting, which will basically free up doctors and not have to report them individually on a manual basis. So that's one. And two, sort of talking to what Hillary's saying, I do believe that, albeit anecdotal, that there's a bit of work to do on how many sleep studies are requested and to what end is the study undertaken in terms of what do we do next. It's not something that we've got into yet. But in the list of things that we probably need to talk about, some practices do order an inordinate amount of sleep studies.
Yeah. True. But the other thing that comes through primary care, which means that we do the request, is pre-assessments from elsewhere. So our local one is obviously Practice Plus, who will very frequently say in pre-anesthetic assessment, we think they're high risk for sleep apnea because they're using particular algorithms now that some people, essentially, if you say that you are snore and you're male and you're over a particular age, you will require a sleep study. So we have a choice as GP either to put them through a sleep study, or we have to newly refer them to a different provider, which is you anyway. Yeah. So there is something I think we need to talk to the commissioners about that stops those providers doing this. That if they want those investigations, they should be referring directly, because then that will give you better data of truly where these are coming from. But it would also allow you to bid as a provider, because I don't think that's an all-encompassing service. I think that sends a patient from pillar to post, which is also not helpful. And sleep study is one of those examples. The other one is cardiology, and they like to throw back to us quite a lot. But I think we need to probably have a conversation with Practice Plus to say, please stop doing that.
So onwards, mental health, Leslie, the numbers are considerably better in December because mental health providers within now kind of up their capacity, put a bit more focus around escalated pathways and provided more crisis services, so patients went to alternative places. I have to say that I don't think we're in the place yet where that's sustainable, so we've got more work to do. Non-admitted and admitted and returning patients, I could talk to you for hours about that. I won't, but there is no real correlation between the number of people who turn up on a regular basis and the alternative would have been to admit them, and that would have prevented it. So it's definitely one for a much richer conversation. There are some patients who come to A&E a lot, and they are overseen by place-based leaders and multi-agency assessments. But the returning non-admitted to admitted there's not enough data to prove or disprove that theory. Although we do notice if someone was here yesterday and they're there again, we would pick that up in terms of service delivery. Patient choice around cancer, particularly, is quite often in endoscopy, and so we might think we want to get people in for colonoscopy within a certain timescale because that's what guidance tells us. Not all the public want to be sort of shoehorned into a diagnostic process really quickly. The number of patients that we investigate under a 2-week wait in lower GI is high. It's a big process. And, you know, for example, if somebody's going on holiday, not everybody gets a 2-week wait letter and thinks, I can't wait to get into hospital. Some people choose to do their life things and then fit it in later. So, yeah, there's stuff around that. There's other bits around, you know, in the summer holidays, you might get people saying, I can't do that for 6 weeks because I've got my kids and they're off school. And you saying, well, you're on a 2-week wait, but where do we want to investigate you? But people are allowed to choose what the, you know, relative urgency is of certain things. So I think there's elements of choice that impact, but then the standard is not 100%. So it does allow for that. The learning disabilities flag, Mahbub, is on our PTL. We can filter. I think I go back to the board about 2 years ago when we added a learning disabilities flag to our PTL, and the learning disabilities team can proactively download the name, waiting time, specialty of every patient with an LD flag on our PTL and provide proactive sort of holistic care and support to any patient that needs to come in for investigations or treatment. So ongoing work. That will never stop, but yes, it does exist. To Hillary's point around knee replacements, it is one for the APC, but I think it's even bigger than that. I think GIRFT has a major role in designing programs that look at the efficacy of certain surgical procedures and standardization within some of that. I think there's a double-edged sword at the moment because we think we're going to be introducing more choice for patients around place of surgery, options around where you receive planned care. And I think trying to standardise delivery and offer choice and sort of provider plurality is a difficult one to square off. It's really an interesting debate, but GIRF's probably a national body that talks about quality and productivity and efficiency is probably the best vehicle for that.
Well, thank you very much, Fiona. Very comprehensive go through the Bond report. Can I hand over to Mike? To take us to on the final report and then beginning on workforce improvement.
Thanks, Rabib. So the numbers in the pack and are up to the end of November, so that's the 8th month of the financial year. At the end of that month, we had a deficit of just over £23 million, which is adverse to the plan of 12.8. The red and the green tracker that we keep shows that it's absolutely kind of smack bang in the middle of where we thought we could be, given the fact we knew that there was £26 million worth of risk in the plan that we submitted. So not where we need to be, but certainly not a surprise to be where we are. What we have seen is that the run rate has improved quarter on quarter. So we were 4 million in quarter one, average monthly deficit down to 3 in quarter two. We're hovering between 1.5 and 2 in the third quarter of the year, so it isn't moving in the right direction. But we do need to hit a recovery trajectory, which means the final 3 months of the year can be £1 million deficit. So we do need to kind of halve again. Obviously, what is a very difficult and busy time of year to do so. The variance is very much a K-driven variance. You'll see in the report. Having said that, there are lots of good things happening in the areas, and I won't go too much into them because Janine will cover those. But we are most likely going to get our agency target for the year, which is bad when you think what our history has been around agency staff. So that's really positive. We're on trajectory to hit £30 million savings again for the second year running, like you mentioned earlier, which again is really impressive. Quite a lot of that is in the elective space that Jen just talked about, the benefit of the boring charts, but that benefit is about £10 million, so well worth knowing the chart. But we've done one in other areas as well, diagnostics and procurement, things we've made really good savings. And the nursing and non-medical as well done really, really well. And we've moved to kind of zero agency in those areas, excepting for some exceptions about corridor care and that we know about. There's a bit more work to do on medical rate. That's the big area within our plan. We've got a bit more to go on, but again, there are positives in there with the recruitment trajectories that we have. Things are moving in the right direction, just not quite as quickly as we might. Capital on track. That's good. We will spend our capital allocation this year. The area of concern is cash. We did put a £21 million application in for cash. We have had £8 million approved, so we're just trying to work through what that means, but it will mean things are very, very tight in February and March. There's one round of revenue support applications left, which will be in March this year. To work that through with support of the region potentially, but that does require us to improve our trajectories. One other thing to flag, because there is an additional risk against getting to the recovery number that we need, that there is now a cap to the elective recovery fund. We don't quite know what that looks like yet because we haven't been given numbers to the ICS. There are going to be allocations to the system level, but from what we've heard, we think there's a potential for another £2 to £3 million worth of risk created to our financial position because of that in the final quarter of the year. So that's where we are this year, and also I think we're going to cover planning in the second part of the meeting.
Thank you very much. Janine, is there anything that you'd like to add to your report?
Yeah, so I think just to build. So in terms of our agency spend, I'm really pleased, in the same way as Fiona pointed out in the performance report, that even at our very busiest, when we've had significant demand, we have managed to remain below our 3% agency target.
the bulk of that being driven, as we all know, by mental health and corridor care. I know that lots of work is happening across North East London to look at how we might improve that situation. But our work is continuing in terms of continuing to recruit our substantive workforce, and we can see that we are growing our substantive workforce and we remain an attractive place to work. And that's enabling us to draw closer to that 1 in, 1 out that we need in order to deliver the savings. And we're seeing that also flow through in terms of how staff are reporting experiencing working at work. Because we know that when you work with more agency and temporary staff, your day-to-day is made harder because they're not as familiar with our processes and so on. So there is a positive picture there. And I'll stop there.
Thanks, Janine. Any questions, any comments from the colleagues to reports from both Mike and Janine? My comment, obviously, context of it was that when Deloitte came and they had the mirror up, they said that we were doing the right things. We've taken all the low-hanging fruit, which other trusts haven't. So that doesn't mean that it's hard yards going forward from there. The Q1 performance for this year did dip, and you said we recovered the run rate. So run rate from Q4 into Q1 for 25-26. Yes, from Paul, I speak on behalf of everyone again. Your mind of this is that we'll keep that trajectory going. Improvement if we can. You know, we've got very difficult December and January. But what's your thoughts around being able to sustain at least at that the level of Q1 against Q4 this year?
So, I mean, we should be able to. I mean, it's the underlying run rate we've now had is fairly steady, and most of the things that we've done have been sustainable in their delivery. I think the big risk to this becomes changes to things, you know, how the money flows. The big changes in the way that we get paid for elective is a significant risk for us in the first quarter, because there are particular areas around oncology and gynae where we need to support capacity to get through the waiting lists, and we've made those decisions on a framework which exists. We now need to understand a new framework before we can fully understand what that will mean next year. So there are risks around those decisions that were made on good information at the time. So I think we just need to assess over the next 2 to 3 months through planning.
Yeah. Thanks very much. Martin.
Thanks. I was just actually reflecting on something that was said earlier. And it just, in case I misunderstood, as we move from the end of 22, 23, 24 into 24, the sort of the run rate, as you called it, sort of went up, and we had to work really hard because we worked quite hard to actually get it down to actually hit the targets we had at the end of last financial year. Do you understand what caused it to go up so that we've had to work again to bring it down? Because I'm thinking that, are there any learnings from what happened on the transition from the end of last financial year to this year that we need to actually be cognizant of as we go forward from March 25 into April 25?
Yes, it's a good question. A lot of it was in the pay area. I think we'll probably do some analysis and kind of share it with you. A lot of it was in the pay area. We've only recently kind of got back on top of the rates. We had a dip in the first half of the year, really, where we had seen some of our escalated rates going in the wrong direction, challenging the staff. So it's largely in the pay area, but we'll do a bit of analysis, and I'll bring that back to part of planning updates. I think you're right. Kind of planning off the back of avoiding those happening again is a good idea.
Thank you.
Yeah. I think building on that point, one of the things that we believe will help mitigate against that is our increased grip and control regarding annual leave. So at the end of last year, we see a spike in staff using up their annual leave, and that then leads to a spike in our temporary staffing costs. This year, we've been very clear that there will be no carryover And so people have been encouraged to spread their annual leave, and therefore we hope that we've mitigated that side.
Thank you for that. Thanks, Mike, Janine, and comments from colleagues. Moving on to the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee report. You again.
Thank you very much. So I think my three colleagues did a much better job than I of the detail of the finance report, as I predicted they would. The Audit and Risk Committee met in December, just before Christmas. The most significant item to report is the status of the external audit, which, as I sit here, is not yet concluded, because the work required on the model was more extensive than we had anticipated. And effectively, the entire model, all 146 component parts, have had to be remodelled. At the meeting on the 19th, we agreed that it was likely to take us to the end of January to do that and for it to be audited. So we are not yet at a point where we have got audit clearance. However, as I understand it, so not in the report, I think the remodelling has been done. So it's now with the auditors and going through that process. It may therefore result in amendments to the accounts that may require us to come back to the board, depending on scale. We have a level of delegation to the audit committee, but given the significant amount of reworking that's required, it may require us to come back to the board. But I think we agreed that we could do that by email, should it be required. So still more work to be done, but a huge effort to remodel 146 PFI models. I mean, it's unheard of, really, absolutely unheard of. And we should have proper credit, I think, at board to Chris Randall, who has really carried the burden on this and has done fantastic work. It is my fervent hope that, having reworked it all from scratch, it will put us in a much better position for the impending audit of 24-25, which we will actually be starting the interim on very soon, hopefully the day after we finish the audit for the previous year. So that's clearly the biggest thing that has been exercising the audit committee. The committee also received and endorsed the accounts charity for onward transmission to the corporate trustee today. We also received an update report from our internal audit provider, who reported that they are broadly on track for their annual opinion, though there has been a little bit of delay in concluding some pieces of work and getting some management actions moved forward, but they are confident they will rescue that position and therefore be able to give us that annual opinion, which is key to our year-end process. So very important that we get that concluded. We also, as a committee, spent some time talking about the basis of the 5-year internal audit plan and how we make sure that it has appropriate coverage. And I think that conversation will be ongoing, not least in terms of making sure we pick up clinical areas appropriately. But that was a good conversation, I think. We received a specific report on workforce and international recruitment. It was partial assurance with improvement opportunities. The report was received well, and we understood reflected fairly what was found, and there will be work to tighten up the processes to make sure going forward we cover off the recommendations that have been provided to us. We received a good report from our counter fraud colleagues. We had a bit of a conversation about mandatory training. So in the world of counter fraud, the needle is turning towards making counter fraud training mandatory. That runs contrary to other parts of the NHS, which is saying we should reduce the amount of mandatory
training. So there is a little bit of a contradiction there. So we have asked that that be discussed and considered in the right place to make sure we get the right outcome and don't overburden our staff, but do make sure that they are appropriately trained in things that they need to be appropriately trained in. That was so good, wasn't it? It required an interjection. We had an update on the declarations of interest progress. That was one of the internal audit reports, which has significant assurance and really excellent work rolling out the system, which will give us the robust data and the control mechanisms. So Mahboob's referenced it. I'm sure you've all filled in your declarations, and we will come back to that as a committee when we've got that rich set of data ready to scrutinise. We had a report on the risk management work that we've commissioned Rob Corral to support us on. That is making good progress. We've now got a governance structure in place to take phase one of that work forward, and the oversight group will be meeting, I think, next week to support that work. So that is progressing. We received a report on the BAF, which obviously is the culmination of all the work happening in the various committees. And as an audit committee, the process and the way of driving the BAF forward, we're very pleased with it, is now getting regular scrutiny at each of the committees and being looked at in some increasing depth. But obviously what will happen is when we start next year, we will have refreshed our annual plans, so we're going to need to refresh our BAF to reflect the revised objectives in our annual plan. Risk register, still a work in progress. I think it's safe to say we still do have a number of historic risks that need to be looked at in more detail, but there were clear signs of progress, and we're looking forward to the next meeting in February. It is moving forward now. And we received some policies overseas patients, private patients. We were happy with minor changes. They will go back into the process, and received our annual report on health and safety, which we noted. We had our usual items of business like bad debt write-offs, so the usual business of the committee progressed. So with the exception of the external audit status, there was nothing material to escalate to the board. Everything is moving forward as it needs to. Thank you.
Thanks very much, Sue. Really busy time in audit. Hand's gone up straight away. Hilary.
That always worries me when the hand goes up straight away.
Well, given you mentioned the risk register and all the rest of it, I was just wondering if you, or perhaps this is more of a question for Linda, is do you have a sense of when we might actually have a kind of agreed risk appetite point? Because I think it would be quite relevant actually, and particularly we've had risk that have been sitting there for years and have been flat.
So that is a question for Linda. We are clear that we need to have a board workshop about it. I'm not sure that we've got it scheduled yet.
Yeah.
So yes, so it's part of the phase one risk maturity work, which concludes by June. So between now and June, we will have to take a piece of work. There is a draft piece of work that has been undertaken. It's being reviewed at the moment. That's going to be looked at in the oversight group next week. Then move forward. The other piece of work that's imminent is the commencement of the chief executives this meeting, oversight meeting, and that will all play into considering and reviewing that risk. Discussion. Very lots of work at the moment.
Thank you. Martin.
I've got some not very good news for you, Sue, on the sort of fraud front. For my sins, I attended a UK compliance.
Tell me about the new duty.
Tax compliance seminar earlier this week, and there is a new duty on organisations because HMRC have estimated the amount of lost revenue they believe is in the system from fraud occurring in organisations.
So this is this has the potential to be quite significant because it's about fraud designed to benefit the organisation itself rather than the individuals. That's right, isn't it?
It could be both.
Yes.
And organisationally, if you can't demonstrate that you put training and procedures in place, then HMRC could potentially fine you. Whether or not they fine an NHS trust is another question, but that's what's behind it.
So the new reporting duty about fraud that benefits the organisation is not something that we discussed at the committee. We discussed training more broadly, but I am aware of that in that enhanced reporting obligation, and I do intend to ask our accountable provider about how we're addressing it when you next meet.
Yeah, thank you very much. Just out of interest, if it is in local government, we have to do it manually. So we'll move on to the next item, which is the emergency preparedness, resilience and response annual report. Welcome, Keith, to the meeting.
Good, everybody. Thank you very much. So, as I always have to take the paper as read, but I think as reported to Tech and FIG, I think 2024 was challenging. Fortunately, we front-loaded the year with our testing and exercising, with appropriate names for exercise, which meant that we still had met most of our requirements when we hit quite a run of incident responses. So I've reported out on 12 in the paper, and we've done a deep dive about how we take those forward into 2025. So lots of training, exercises, positive work on our longest recruitment, and reporting to the performance review meetings for the clinical groups has also helped push through the engagement. Moving through 2025, we will carry on front-loading training and exercising. We've got medicine planned exercise, we've got communications planned exercise, and cancer and clinical support within the first couple of months of the calendar year. Our training, we're reviewing to provide flexibility for the services due to competing demands. So modular e-learning, so hopefully that will support with engagement and time allowance. Longest was supported in 2024 by setting targets, and so we are hopefully approving at the end of January the same in terms of our chemical response training. So we're looking at those numbers and we'll agree those in January with the clinical groups, so so we have a mutual understanding. And again, that will then provide to the performance review meeting so we can make sure that that's tracked. Videos and engagement and all those sorts of things as we work through to build up that engagement as well. Just following on from the item just mentioned, we're also aware of new legislation on Martin's Law, the Procurement Act. So the Procurement Act will be working before the end of Feb to meet some of that with the procurement business partners and Martin's Law security. I think those are the main things.
Thank you, Keith.
I'm saying, there's a huge amount of work in here, so well done making it look so easy to read and understand. I suppose the other thing to mention is that, first of all, we got a lot better at doing this, and I think that should be applauded. But secondly, throughout 2024, we had a fair share of real incidents, actual, where we tested not only whether we knew what to do, but whether it worked. And David and I, probably not long known each other before, we were talking to each other at 3 o'clock in the morning about the entire network going down. So I think what I was going to say is that these are well understood and well rehearsed across the organisation now. We've taken the opportunity over the last sort of 12 months to refine the people who are on at each level of the on-call system to make sure that they understand what to do, they've got the right skills and experience to keep the organisation safe. So, that's probably all I want to say on that. Thank you.
Caroline and David.
I think mine actually sort of picks up from both of what you were saying. And there's some lovely times when after having the cybersecurity training, which Dave so wonderfully organised for us, someone the next day said to me, "What would you do if?" And I had a lovely answer. And I was wondering, out of all the work that you've done, training, preparing, thinking about these things, has there been something that happened when you thought, "Thank God we did that. That was really timely"?
So it's been really interesting as I've been doing the deep dive, where we have had all the responses have worked. Where they've worked best is where we've actually had that experience. So for example, your 3 o'clock in the morning, we had CrowdStrike. Where we'd had, at a ward level, but where we'd had an oxygen outage at a ward, we had a similar situation and learned really quickly. We learned really quickly. And we had one yesterday at Coins. By the time I got to the ward in less than 5 minutes, all under control, completely as per process. So while things may keep happening that is outside our control, exactly like you said, there's been nothing too scary, and we learn every time to make sure we are in control.
Good to hear the process works like that, so. Okay.
Yeah, just, so I suppose as we're coming up to EPR, are we discussing with other trusts how they approach EPRR in using an EPR and around to go live? And are we bringing those lessons back to this organisation to provide assurance that we've got that covered?
So I would say my Band 7, who's been in post for approximately a year now, still suffers from PTSD of implementing EPR at King's. So she is well rehearsed and has all of those connections and contacts and scenarios and all of the things that we are working. So whenever we engage with the team at EPR, and we're looking to use, so we hold our steering groups every other month. We're looking to use those interim months for the first half of the year on EPRR, if that's what EPR needs, or how the services want to use those interim periods as best suits, unless things like Procurement Act, Martin's Law, or other policies or legislation as.
Thank you. I think it's a subset actually of what David's just asked. I just wanted to check that we've actively engaged you in the planning for EPR, and very specifically in those areas where perhaps we are having to tweak what we're doing. So, and there are going to be some clear hotspots of concern. So prescribing, for instance, and how that all bolts together. Have you put together a plan to test this stuff before we go live so that we can learn and move forward? So I think it's a slightly more detailed aspect of David's broader question.
So I definitely think there's more to be done on that integration piece. So like I said, Laura from my team has been through it and has all of her experience and documentation, etc. from King's. David's team have run the site leadership forums and those scenarios and asked the clinical groups to go out and deliver. And we've got the oncoming team that he's recruited that are sort of identified for us. Max is co-chairing it. Max co-chairs when Fiona is unavailable for a DPSG. He co-chairs and is also leading some of those groups for EPR. So there's that connection. And Dion, the quality and safety huddles on a monthly basis are going to have that more focus from the end of February. So I think there's work to be done, but it's starting there, and I'm hoping to get that the pace stepped up.
Can I just add one thing to that too? So there's a step before it gets to Keith, which is the subject matter expert risk assessment. The taking EPMH, it's easy to talk about that subject. We've got a risk assessment at pharmacy, specialist pharmacy level to tell us what we think about the programme and how we think it's going to progress. There's a technical assessment of that. The subject matter expert assessment of that gives us better understanding of whether we're going forward and what risks associated with that are. I think that's the bit we're in at the minute, and obviously Keith's team and the response of the organisation will be organised through that, but I think we're at the first stage just at this moment in time.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And for your enthusiasm as well. Subject. And on to an equally kind of subject, review of annual goals, 160. Happy. Not here now. Sorry? No, no. I was looking at Dawn.
That was like the hot potato.
I've got to, yeah, quite, yeah. So this paper is just a, it's a 6 monthly update on where we are against our annual goals for the year. It just summarises that against the 6 annual goals, there were 22 headline objectives and 56 kind of deliverables within those. You might want to think about having 56 next year, given the money in the EPR. But anyway, on that reflection, it just shows that generally we're doing quite well in terms of the delivery of those, with 13 kind of successes reported, 34 being things that are on track or in delivery, and just the 9 which are behind. And you can see which areas of the annual goal and priority they are within. So it's here really for information and transparency against any goals. Yeah, that's what I would just say.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah, when there isn't a name on a report, then it just defaults to the chief executive. Thank you for that. And are there any comments? Sue?
So although it's not my hot potato, this did get considered, I can't remember if it was the audit committee or the finance committee. But actually we felt that it was a really, really useful document, particularly in light of our production of our annual report, because it does pull together in one place the things we said we'd do and how well we've done against them, and therefore documents our achievements. So I found it, and I think the committee found it to be a very digestible and understandable piece of work, and we absolutely commended it. But of course, we've got to do it all again for the whole year. So in a couple of months, we'll be looking at it again. But we thought it was good, so I thought I'd share that with you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I've got one question on it. I was looking at this. It's on section 2, create a diverse and inclusive workplace, around 1B. Not sure whether that's with Catherine or Janine, but whichever one of you wants to do take that, about the number of global majority nursing staff at band 8B and above by 15% to 20. We've got, we currently have 6, so we're on a trajectory of improvement around there. But let's talk about the challenges and how you're approaching those between yourselves.
So I think if you look at the number of nurses, global majority in band 6, band 7, band 8A, they are definitely increasing. You can see that year on year. 8B nurses tend to move more slowly than the lower grades, so there's less of a turnover. But we're very clear that when we go through that process, we have EDI partners on the interview boards, and I'm not sure whether they're making an enormous difference. We have some evidence to say that they're making some difference, but we also have one of the corporate nurses on those panels. We have got evidence that since they've been on the panels, which have been 8 years, that has made a difference. So I think when those opportunities are coming through, we are seeing nurses from the global majority applying for that post, and we know that we have grown our own nurses who are ready to move into those posts. So if you look in specific areas, so maternity and geriatrics in particular, they have very high levels of 8A nurses who are now ready to move into those 8B posts. So I'm not sure they're going to hit the 20, but I think we have the things in place and the aspiration to get there.
Thanks, Catherine. And if there's a large number ready, and hopefully that'll be 25, 26 when we get that. Yeah.
We certainly have you can see it really clearly that as the 7s have gone into the 8As, the 8As are going into the 8Bs. We've got a couple of 8Bs who are in interim posts now. Yeah. If people keep moving up and into those posts, we've got quite long tails in terms of secondments. We should be getting more people into this post. So they're definitely ready. Yeah.
Thank you for that, Steve. Caroline.
Looking at the goals, we've got create a diverse and inclusive workplace, addressing the inequality experienced by staff and patients. Would there be any value, I wonder, in bringing those together? Because if you look at the measures, there's a crossover there. ultimately, what are the reasons why we're creating a diverse and inclusive workplace? It is for the staff, it is for the patients. So I wonder if there's any value in separating those, or was there particular thinking around the separation?
So this is part of the conversation that we've started to have regarding what the emphasis on anchor and health inequalities means, how we present and think about the goals and how they intersect. So yes, I think we're looking at that at the moment.
Thanks very much. No further questions or comments. I can't see any, so we'll move on to the next items, which is the board assurance framework. Linda.
Thanks, Lou. So this is the board assurance framework position at the end of December, the 12 asterisks. The exec summary made it slightly different, so just giving a snapshot of the key points, a few key points for each of the 12 asterisks. The heat map on page 958, 340 and 389. That shows that ED safety and financial sustainability remain high scoring risks globally, which creates the conversations that we've been having in the meeting today. Work continues to review these risks in the board committees, with the Audit and Risk Assurance Committee having the oversight of the overarching risk framework and internal controls. At this stage of the year, we're about to embark on a process where we review the risk profile again as we develop our objectives, and Julian's just referred to that in terms of inequalities. We will have the year out for March meeting, and in April we will look at the revised framework linked to the new objectives that we set. Specifically, the executive team is currently undertaking a further review of how the BAF reflects partnership working, the place and the acute provider collaborative and inequalities in the whole piece around anchor organisation. And that's due to be coming in draft form to the FIT meeting at the end of the month. And some of that work will play out in the revised pattern that we have in the coming months. The only other thing I wanted to mention in terms of the processes around this was that we already referenced the risk maturity work. The report went to the audit committee. So we're expecting that the outputs from that will assist the review of the BAF as we move forward. And that will include common risk language, how we refer to risk, how we use risk in our risk registers, within the BAF, and also the establishment of the executive risk oversight group, which will be very closely looking at the risk appetite, where we are with our risks on a monthly basis. Exec risk leads are in the room, so if there are any questions in relation to the specific risks and the detail on controls, I'm sure they can answer those questions. I'm happy to answer any questions on the process.
Great, thank you, Linda. Anyone, any questions, any comments on the?
Not on the current board assurance framework, but it's more about looking forward and thinking about the financial constraints, the even tighter financial constraints we're going to implement under in this financial year, and what impact that might have on the target board assurance framework levels that we actually think about for next year. So it's not anything specific this year, because actually if you look at I really like in particular the improvements that we made to the way it's been presented during this year. And it's really clear from the tackling that we've struggled to actually make any significant inroads to the overall levels of assurance that we need. So I'm just flagging that next year is going to be more difficult, and would we want to reassess where we expect to land at any particular point in time? Because some of these, I mean, March 2025, we can just go what is it insurance. We're in January already. What's the likelihood of achieving our target for the year? And probably not very high given all the other challenges we're facing. And therefore, going forward into next year, I think we need to get some further thought.
Thank you. That's a good point. Matthew?
No, I mean, I agree with that. I mean, I think we're going to start a discussion probably before, but I think it's a 6% cost improvement programme, which will involve cost cutting. I think it will make it hard for us to manage risk, and we will have to make decisions about where we're going to tolerate more risk. And take 6% out of an organisation unless they're either wasting huge sums of money. And I think if you look at the analysis Lloyd did years ago and taking out all the opportunity, they identified at that point piece of weakness. If I go beyond that, you have to decide where you constrain access to services, and that will affect how much planned care work we do. It will affect the capacity we have to support the emergency pathways, and that's the kind of decision making that a reduced income position creates in the hospital environment. So, yeah, so I think the planning round is going to inform how all these risks shape up.
Thank you for that. Yeah, absolutely with financial pressure, but also from the system demanding more of us as well. Yeah. So, and the work that Linda has commissioned will improve our dynamic approach towards risk. We will see some changes in the next few months on that. So, great stuff. Moving on to the final items of business. I don't have any other business notified. We have no in our room. We'll do meeting effectiveness after we've done questions from public. And Mr. Walker, thank you very much for submitting your question according to our standing orders. If you'd like to read out your question, I'll make sure it's answered.
Thank you, Chair, and question your indulgence for the second question, if I may. The first question is, it's very welcome that you put a campaign for £35 million A&E extension. If I've got it right, that's going to be no new acute, no overnight beds, though, as I understand it. Would the board consider at some point another wing at King George? Over the years, been quite a few wings added under King George, for acute beds, community beds, return of maternity. Obviously, I'm not expecting an instant decision on that, so that's something you might want to consider. That's my first question. I can ask you the second question now. I think.
Yeah, no, please ask it now. To vote together.
The second point is, can the £35 million bid be a standing item? Because my guess, it's not going to be a standing item on the agenda, because my guess is it's not going to happen instantly. And public participation, loads of evidence says it's a good thing, improves communities. To engage the public, to allow the public to engage with your campaign, to increase public questions more than 60 seconds at the minute. It's limited to 60 seconds on your agenda.
Okay, thank you very much for those questions. I mean, between us, we'll take those questions. I'll sort of begin and hand over some detail to Matthew. But in terms of welcome both questions, from the investment that we've seen at King George Hospital over the last few years, it's very significant. We've had more capital investment in King George in the last few years than we've seen for a very long time. Capital allocation in North East London, and particularly for ourselves per capita, is low compared to other parts of London and the country as a whole. And we have been making the case both at North East London level through the NEL ICB, but also at individually at our trust to ensure our increased capital allocation. And some of the investments we've seen that we have made happen are the Barking CDC, St George's Hub, health and wellbeing hubs, both in Barking and Ilford, and we'll continue to make those investments there and within both our sites as well. And you mentioned public participation. I'm very impressed by the level of engagement that we have on individual services where the expert voice of patients are brought into service redesigns, service improvements. And it was only the other day I was talking with the surgery leadership team. They said they were going to bring in patient voice into their management meeting, so the patient experience is heard at all levels within the organisation. And at board level, this is only one of, I think, numerous opportunities for us to listen and act on patients' experiences, their advice, their comments about how we can improve services for them. And at the start of the meeting, we had an excellent presentation from colleagues who were talking about the voice of those who use our maternity services and how those have been played into improvements of our planning. So when you talk about engagement, I think engagement is pretty impressive, but we can always do more. I'm very pleased to say and dispel any myths that are there. We don't have a time limit on questions at board. We will take all questions that are duly submitted according to our standing orders, regardless of the number of questions and time it takes. And this is something I think excellent about having board meetings. I would love to see more people from the public attending board meetings, and I do, want to commend you. But actually, you do come to our board meetings, and when we have virtual sessions, you have been watching those virtually as well. So your engagement, I hope that does continue, and that we'll see more members of the public, more stakeholders coming along to these meetings. But on the detail of what you've asked, I'll ask Matthew to cover those and for both of your questions.
Thank you. And just to, I mean, we've got Ron here as a patient partner at Trust Board, which I think not all trusts do, and I think it's really welcome to have patient partners represented on the board. In terms of the 35 million, rest assured it will be certainly mentioned at every opportunity whenever we have an update on it. We intend to push really hard on this, so I'll certainly be bringing it back in my chief exec's report to update the board. We'll be getting feedback from our local MPs about the level of connection and contact they've had from people. I think we were pleased that, by this morning we'd had more than 100 members of the public could click through the QR code posters to get their MPs' contact details, and we expect more as that comes. So we're certainly upgrading. We've talked about the main risks today. Two of the topics we've talked about today. One is the corridor care in the Queen's Emergency Department. And I think we'd probably say, as a group, it's the thing that worries us the most. And we've also heard from maternity services about the access to theatres for C-sections. I think that's probably the next biggest capital-related risk that we've got. And we would like to see more development here at King George Hospital. There's an opportunity for us probably to develop the surgical capacity here to take some activity off the Queen site and enhance that here. We'd be really interested in that, and that'd be Block 7 here for the electric theatre. I think in terms of other development, I can't imagine a circumstance at the minute where we're looking for more acute inpatient beds, because we know we've got several wards worth of people who could be cared for elsewhere. I think to the chair's point, developments like St George's in Hornchurch, Barking Community Hospital, the fact that we're now providing secondary care services at multiple locations in every borough we serve, I think is really positive. I certainly can see more development happening here at King George and on Goodmayes in the years to come. Not necessarily more acute beds, but certainly more care being delivered here that helps us manage that patient demand, both planned and unplanned care in a better way. So I think, the more we can do here to develop services, the better. I think it's interesting. I mean, Mike, what was our capital budget this year? It's 18 million, 23?
This year's budget, it's 12 locally plus about 10 of programmes.
Yeah, so about 23 million. The kind of stuff we're talking about for the ED, one of the reasons we're making this campaign so focused is we think that goes well outside anything we get through the normal mail routes. North East London this year is about 80 million capital. The kind of sums we're talking about for these investments, I think, need to be developed outside the annual planning cycle, and there needs a broader recognition, which I think Secretary of State and others have talked about, that the NHS needs to start thinking much more strategically about capital investment over multi-year cycles. But I think, we'll keep pushing. Thank you, Anne.
Anything else, sir? Thank you. And I think probably my last comment on this particular point is that when I am, and I guess I'm not exclusive here, but when as a board, another colleague who's spoken with patients and listened to their views, They've said what they would like to have is care close as possible to home, the settings that are easily accessible, etc. So, you know, moving part of the gynae pathway out into the community has been a sign of huge success. I've spoken to some very vulnerable in the sense that they don't have access to a private car, so public transport is limited. Having local services that meet their needs wrapped around with primary care and the voluntary and community sector is what the future is going to be for health service provision. This part of London that we're here to deliver for all our residents. So thank you very much for your questions. Thank you. Do keep on sending them in.
There's a question from a member of staff in the.
I see it.
Would you like me to read it out?
Yeah.
Yes. So it says, given the recent corridor care crisis, what assurances are being given to staff to ensure they're able to practice safely and to report concerns appropriately? I mean, I don't know, Catherine, do you want to pick that from the nudge side?
So I think that we recognise that it's very difficult for people to work in the corridor. We've got our processes and policies in place about how we maintain as safe as possible care in the corridor, and we would encourage people to complete IR1s if they feel that they are being asked to practice unsafely. We have significantly increased the number of staff in the corridors as well.
And I would say we've got, as an organisation, I think for an acute trust, an exemplary psychological support service for our staff, with a number of full-time qualified psychologists providing support, including dedicated psychology support in the emergency department. So we recognise it's a really poor environment at times for both staff and patients, and we're doing our very best to support them. Thank you for the question.
Thank you for that. Ron?
Yes, just on the question of corridor care, which is obviously a sensitive subject from a patient representative point of view. And I spend a lot of time talking to people in the corridors, because I come here not as a voice of Ron, but as the voice of as many of the patients as I could possibly talk to. And most of them acknowledge there's very little we can do under our current constraints about having people in corridors. But what is really refreshing and really heartening is that the care that people get in corridors is not the issue. They're not happy they're in corridors, not happy with the lights above their head, they're not happy with the fact that they're there for a long time. But when you talk to them, what they do say is, but they're looking after me really, really well.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Not everybody says that, but the vast majority of people say that. And that is really heartening. You know, that they're not happy they're in a corridor, but the level of care that our staff provide them is exemplary, and our staff should be very proud of it.
Clearly, staff feel really uncomfortable about it, but they should be reassured that as the exec group, when we see it, we put in a huge amount of effort to try everything we possibly can to get the flow through the hospital working so we can reduce the number of patients in the corridor as quickly and as efficiently as possible.
Thank you very much, Oscar. Thank you for raising your question. Hopefully the responses you received have been helpful. Just so that you're aware, I'm meeting with staff side on Monday, and I'll discuss this with them as well. So sure that it's been taken up at that level too. So thank you very much, everyone, colleagues, for this public part of our meeting this afternoon. We're almost bang on time, and we have a 15-minute break, and then we'll start this private board at 3:45. Thank you.